All right, friends, we have started. We are live. Clerks, can we get a roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair. On the roll, Councillor Wong. Thank you. Councillor Chu.
Here.
Councillor Dhaliwal. Councillor Pootmans. Councillor Walcott.
Here.
Councillor Craw.
I'm here.
Councillor Sharp. Councillor Wyness. Councillor Meehan. Councillor Chabot. Councillor Spencer.
Here.
Councillor McLean.
Here.
Councillor DeMong. Mayor Gondek.
Here.
And Chair Penner.
I am here.
Thank you, Chair.
Great. We are back. So I am going to move on to creating our next panel. I'm going to go back a few names just to double check. Kareem Ali, Paul Getty, Christopher Davis, Claudia Griebel, Max Callback. Okay. James Huesar. Tom Perosek. Okay. Adam Henry. Shelley Morrison. Okay, so those were people in panels sort of 20 through 26 who hadn't spoken. I will go back to those again. So I'm going to be calling names from panels 27 to just see who is here. So Michelle Tuz Atkinson. Chaz Smith. Bob Morrison. Robert Mayer. You're Robert? Okay. Fantastic. Okay, here's what we're gonna do, because I think that people are probably getting logged back on and they are waiting, trying to finish their lunches. Who else in the audience has pre-registered to speak? So 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, you four lovely humans, come on up to the podium. You're going to be our first panel, and so just...
James Huesar is on the line.
James, you're on the line? Okay.
Yeah.
I will, so James, if you can, I'm gonna make a panel of 6. Are we okay with that? Okay, we're gonna make a panel of 6. Or Sarah, do you wanna wait till the next panel? Okay, Sarah will wait till the next panel. Okay, so James, you're gonna go first in this panel, and then we're gonna go to the rest of the individuals who are here in person with us today. And then what we'll just do is grab your name when you come forward. Okay, so James, you have 5 minutes, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm just a resident of Calgary who rents and wanted to provide some more anecdotes of how the housing crisis affects renters, to continue to keep that in mind as this issue progresses. While the housing crisis can be an issue of supply and demand, it's also an issue rife with exploitation of one party and entitlement for other parties. So I've heard the term mortgage helpers used to describe people who rent, and I'd like to provide some anecdotes that highlight that we're not just mortgage helpers, we're usually like mortgage payers and capital builders. In August, I had a friend calling me in tears. This person, the person who previously owned their property had recently sold it, and the new property owner was coming in. This new property owner increased the rent by $400 a month for each of the tenants, which was unexpected and difficult to accommodate as a student entering their 4th and final year at ACAD. Their parents don't live in Calgary. They aren't able to provide financial assistance for them, and the $400 a month increase was overwhelming for them to receive. However, the new property owner assured them that he was only raising the rent in order to improve the property, something that the current tenants neither requested, required, nor appreciated. And given the choice to pay $400 a month less or new flooring, they would have chosen the less rent every time. And that doesn't even consider the fact that one-time renovation fees would be obviously one-time costs instead of recurring monthly costs. I'm of the mind that the rent increase was actually because the new property owner kept bringing up that they decided to buy the property with an 8% mortgage that he needed to cover. And that was something that nobody actually forced him to do, and something he probably would not have done if he wasn't confident that he would be able to exploit current or new tenants for more rent. So the level of exploitation in housing in Calgary is kind of appalling to me. While there can be disagreements and debates as to how much of a commodity housing should be allowed to be, the current state of the market is far from balanced and has really tipped in the scales in favor of exploitation and property owner greed. Taking my friend for an example, someone made a decision to make an outrageous business choice of mortgaging a property at 8%. And the property owner really doesn't bear any risk in this market. The property owner is allowed to exploit tenants because housing is not just a simple matter of finding a place where you can find shelter. It is a matter of finding a home. And on the topic of finding a home, another issue emerges. My understanding of history, apologies, I'm only 31, is that people would buy a starter home and eventually make payments to accrue capital in order to sell that home and to upgrade in whatever way they saw fit and were capable of doing. And today, people buy one property, and when they accrue enough capital, they buy another property in order to provide housing to renters, in which the renters cover most, if not all, costs that are associated with owning that property. This is a system that doesn't build relationships, community, or an empowered middle class. Instead, this is a system that empowers greed with the added benefit of feeling entitled to experiencing no risk. I've rented my entire adult life, and property owners that rent out properties, it seems like they believe that they should never be at a risk of operating at a loss. When property taxes go up, so does the rent. When renovations are made, the rent goes up again. Market values go up, increased rent again. A global pandemic occurs that affects everyone. What about the rent? Will anybody think of the poor landlords with multiple rental properties? I have another anecdote. Another friend had a lease renewing at the end of August, and in July they reached out to their property owner to inquire if there will be any increases to the rent. And before receiving any response, my friend saw that the property owner posted a question on their neighborhood Facebook group. They were asking, could any landlords let me know what they're charging for rent these days? And then after that, the property owner actually eventually responded and assured them that there would only be a minor increase, probably less than $100. And then 3 weeks later, the property owner comes back and says that they actually made a mistake and would be raising the rent by $600 a month because they didn't check their finances correctly. Again, this is a bit of an example of where a property owner is entitled to a reality where they can say and do whatever they want because they have the leverage of holding someone's life in their hands. So I'm not an economist nor a politician, but I am a human, and I constantly see other humans struggling to live within the system that not only sees them as a mortgage payment, or that only sees them as a mortgage payment. I don't doubt that this crisis is a complex and nuanced issue, but I know that everybody on council signed up for this job and received the confidence of the people who voted for you. So not only am I imploring you and the rest of council to adopt the recommendations of experts that benefit the residents of Calgary, but I hope that you're willing to be creative in the implementation of those recommendations and the opportunities that arise coming forward. Because 2023 is an interesting time to be alive. And
my
it includes
apologies. For interrupting. Your time is up. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You can hang on the line for a few minutes while we finish this panel in case there are any questions. All right. Now I did not write. Oh, I didn't write your names down because okay. The gentleman who I called, would you like to come up second? And can you just remind me of your name? So come on up to the podium. It's your turn to speak. And please just remind us your name.
What's that?
Please remind us of your name.
Okay. My name's Rob Mayer, and I'm here to represent Hearts for Humanity. And it's a group that we had in 2021 in April, all the way to October 8, 2022. We were giving out food, clothing for the homeless, and we were doing very well, but we didn't have enough counseling, enough booting to move us up. You know what I mean? And what we thought is we need 3 levels of housing. Calgary housing for people with no income, and city housing for people for city living. You know what I mean? In the same group with the homeless, you know? And we've been seeing that for about a year and a half. And also what we need is a change with the government housing
Rob,
for a program and
Rob,
social needs.
I'm just going to pause you for a second. Because we have some members listening online, if you're not right at the microphone, they can't hear you. So the microphone's right there, so if you just want to make sure you're there and then they can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. The government has to have a program to the ones that have social problems with people, right? So we need a program to get them in stabilized housing, if needed. Most of them are pretty good, that what I've seen in the last year and a half, you know, and the group. And we'd like to restart again within the next 6-8 months if we get a chance, you know what I mean? But we sure need a boost to get this going, you know, to get everybody together, you know, make 3 programs. That's what we need, and that's what we see. So God bless you guys. Love you all. Thanks for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We're just having a quick issue with the sound, and so just if you give us a second. Councillor Chabot and Councillor Chu, can you hear it now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, sounds like our sound is back on. Good, thank you so much. Okay, Robert, you can go ahead and have a seat.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
All right, you're welcome.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I was gonna say the lady in glasses, but you both have glasses. But we'll just go in order across. So yes, black top, come on up.
Okay, there we go. Hi, good
One-
afternoon.
We're just gonna move the
Any better?
microphone. Perfect, good.
Most stuff has to be lowered. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, Madam Chair, councillors, administrators, and fellow constituents. My name is Dianne Rogers. Just Chair, I believe I was in number 32. Awesome, okay. I was a resident of Ward 4 for more than 20 years, and now I'm residing in Ward 5. Well, first of all, I want to say I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today, and I am speaking in my personal capacity. In 2001, I worked as a public employee with the provincial government, and I earned a moderate income, which actually enabled me to purchase a townhouse in Thorncliffe, which was MC1, on my own. I was then married, raised a child, and lived well in this community for 22 years. Over the last 3 years, my mortgage payments have increased over $350. My condo fees went up $200 a month, and I was required to pay over $10,000 as my share of a special levy assessment, which were, of course, for the repairs to an older condo. In this case, unfortunately, a revolt happened within the condo itself, and I was forced to sell my property. I am now on a fixed disability income and had the choice to go into a rental. That's all I could do. There were not enough affordable homes in the market, and I learned very quickly that Alberta has no rental cap, and my rent may very well be increased at the end of my year term, forcing me to move again. I only moved in May. And having spoken with my landlord, I said, you know, can you be honest with me? Are we looking at a moderate increase come my term? The answer I received was, well, I can tell you I'm definitely going to increase by 100, but there's still another 5 months to go. That doesn't mean it's going to be different, or it doesn't mean it's going to stay the same. It may be different. I did overhear him saying that he's going to increase it by $500 a month. So I am now in this position. As I said, I used to work for the government, and before that, I was trained as a real estate paralegal working with residential relocations. So I have a little bit of information about that. I went through and put in applications for accessible and affordable housing, and I was advised that there is a good chance that I will not be considered for anything of that before my term comes to pass, because there are approximately 5,300 applications in their queue at the moment. So that's going to be a real difficult time for me. I have a child who's actually just about to hopefully start university in January, and it's just her and I. So yeah, it's a difficult place to be. I'm here today to support the 33 recommendations for the NATF and the affordability housing crisis in general, the non-market housing, and of course, the review of the zoning regulations. Now, what constitutes the crisis? This is defined as an intense difficulty or a danger. Let's keep that in mind. As voting constituents, we elect council to do what is best for all people who live in the municipalities, and it is the municipality's responsibility to regulate and review what gets built, when, and where. As a matter of stats, I understand that Calgary, as a result of its population increase, needs 3,000 market houses, and yet there were only 300 built last year. What happened? One of the major deterrents to this construction seems to be, at least to me and what I've heard over the past couple of days, are the zoning regulations, and the length of the process involved addressing those regulations, and some voting constituents who do not want multifamily dwellings or other rezoning to be done in their areas. So what do we do with that? Council needs to take the action on the 33 recommendations put forward by the Housing Affordability Task Force, there we go, that have been made, and not just approve them. This in turn may necessitate amending the zoning stipulations and voting to actually make decisive decisions, possibly by considering co-ops, apartments, attached dwellings, semis, and other multifamily housing, and the models that we have heard about here.
Dianne, your time is up.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I thank you for joining us today.
Okay. Thank you for your attention and for your consideration of what's to come.
Thank you, Dianne. Come on up.
Hello, Council and Mayor. My name is Heather Hollyoake. I'm 37 years old, and yes, I'm the rare born and raised in Calgary. I'm here to show my support for the Calgary housing strategy. I don't have the fancy data or major, but what I do have is the lived experience. I've previously worked at a camp for underprivileged and disadvantaged children. I was an education assistant working with school-age kids with mild to severe diagnoses. Yes, I have witnessed the oppression of others, but I too have experienced the oppression. I look and sound able-bodied, but I have a physical, mental, and learning disability. I need safe and sustainable housing. For 2.5 years and counting, I've been on the wait list for affordable housing and forward housing. We're looking at Horizon Housing, but my hope is low. I'm a single female with no children and not experiencing domestic violence, thank goodness. But my wait list for affordable housing then goes up. Hospitals and agencies give people the same pamphlets that lead to dead ends. The Fair Entry Recreation is a phenomenal program, but if you can't afford it, even with the program's discount, what's the point? I love the Calgary Zoo, but I can only get a discount on the single entry, not on the pass. This is the second time in 2 years I'm facing homelessness. At the end of the month, I might be homeless and couch surfing. I have a lead, but that's a might. And if I get the place, I will be roommating it and would have to live in a community close to where I experience significant amounts of childhood trauma. If you're familiar with the adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs score, I meet 9 out of the 10 multiple times. But what led to the second time of homelessness? August 1st, I took a risk. I was previously living in Citadel, a community I love and feel safe. I took a risk to go into supportive housing, but because I can't meet the requirements, I have been discharged, and those requirements give them funding. Anyone whose basic needs are at risk will notice a physical and mental toll. A person with a mental illness, there's a bigger toll. Your progress in therapy takes a step back, and addiction and suicide increases. The housing crisis is impacting the mental crisis, especially those with a diagnosis. Today, I am breaking the silence, and I am scared. I have attempted suicide multiple times due to housing. That's not okay, and it's not fair to anyone. I can't describe the amount of pain I was in and what it brought back to childhood experiences. I need safe and sustainable housing. I'm a person. We all know someone that suffers. And if nothing comes about what I've said today, at least I've said what I need to move on and maybe give voices to those that don't. But I leave you with this quote from Dr. Jody Carrington, who's a psychologist in Olds, that says, "Braver, the special kind of brave you find in your hardest, darkest moments when you can't predict the outcome." I hold true to that, and I hope you see that quote when you look at the affordable housing strategy. I honestly wrote this on the way here, and given that I have a learning disability and writing is extremely hard, I am proud of myself. I'm proud of myself for taking a risk, writing something, speaking up, and being me and giving voices to others that are oppressed and vulnerable. So thank you for taking this time to listen to everyone. Thank you to the people who have talked. And out of context, thank you to the ones who have helped me that are probably facing housing crises, like nurses, social workers, therapists, the list goes on. Educational assistants. I was one. I can't because I'm on disability. So that's what I say to you. If there's one thing you get, just keep me in your minds when you think of that, when you go to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
I have a picture that I'd like to share.
And can you share your name with us, please?
Yes, I'm Jean Woeller.
Hello, Jean.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this week's meetings. My name's Jean Woeller. Although I come here today as a concerned Calgary citizen and resident of Bowness, I bring relevant experience to this discussion as a volunteer member of our community's Planning and Development Committee. I'm here today to encourage Council to reject the recommendation that's been described as or referred to as blanket upzoning. This tactic will certainly increase density. However, it's unlikely to increase affordability, and it will be at the expense of existing property owners. It will also display renters who live in single-family homes. Put simply, it would be bad and effective. During the public hearing on the Guidebook to Great Communities, one retired planner described how there's sufficient development-ready lands or brownfields to accommodate Calgary's housing needs to the year 2035. Developments like University Districts and Garrison Woods are great examples of building communities with more density. Communities that are walkable, they have amenities close by, and have senior-oriented housing. I would like to see the City of Calgary place more efforts on developing these areas rather than destroying the character of established communities by approving blanket upzoning. I included in my online submission, which you should have received, this image, of a property currently under development in Bowness. It's a corner property. It's not 50 feet wide, as is the expectation of corner properties. And there are backyards of 3 townhouses that overshadow the property to the west. The neighboring property owner is considering selling and moving because this development has destroyed the privacy and enjoyment of her yard. She's an avid gardener who's being forced out of her community. This is becoming too common in the community of Bowness. It's creating winners, the developers, realtors, and losers, existing property owners, and forcing families looking for amenity space to move to the suburbs. This is counter to a quote from Mayor Gondak in the Globe and Mail this week. She stated, if you're wanting to ensure that your community is vibrant, then you need younger families and young professionals to be there, she said. They need to have the type of accommodation that suits their needs while they're just starting out. This is a hope, not a certainty, and the change cannot be undone if approved. The task force suggests that increasing the base land use to allow 4 units or more may occur incrementally. My experience in Bowness suggests this is not the case. I participated in the city's Main Streets initiative in the years 2016-2017 timeframe that resulted in zoning of properties close to the main street to accommodate more density and the approval of the Bowness Area Redevelopment Plan by Council. This seemed like a good urban plan to increase density. However, today on the Planning and Development Committee, I am seeing tens of applications each month to rezone RC1 properties to other more dense forms. Neighbors impacted by this development, like the homeowner next to this townhouse development that I spoke earlier of, would like to see the spot zoning end, as they are the losers in this situation. They are losing enjoyment and privacy of their homes and possibly property value. This spot zoning cannot be considered planning, and it needs to stop. There's no guarantee that RCG densification will create affordability. Knocking down an affordable bungalow and building units whose list prices are greater than the list price of said bungalow does not create affordability. There are environmental impacts as well to be considered. After all, City of Calgary has declared a climate emergency. This densification is creating a hot city because the tree canopy that provides shade and heat protection is being removed. Last week, a property on my crescent, just very close to this one, just lost 16 mature trees that provide shade. And this was to make way for a new multiplex. And just walk the streets of Crestmont on a hot summer day. Feel the heat in this neighborhood that is largely treeless and has much reflective concrete. Compare this to Wildwood and parts of Bowness, where the tree canopy is refreshing. I also encourage Council to allow public participation in the planning process, as it's an important democratic right. It is our city, after all. And we should have the ability to speak to every land use event to express our opinions. In summary, the Housing Affordability Task Force proposed blanket upzoning does not constitute urban planning, and it will not achieve the goal of creating more affordable housing options. And it will create losers who own homes in established neighborhoods and displace renters in family dwellings. And the winners will surely be the developers. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. I don't see, there's no one else on this panel, and I am not seeing any, oh, Councillor Dollywall, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to, Ms. Rogers, thank you for coming out. Really appreciate. I just wanted to give you this opportunity. Like you ran out of time. If you want to conclude something with your wrap up comments here.
Oh, okay.
I very much appreciate that. Thank you. I just got to think. Okay, well, I'll just skip down to this. I was just going to say, finally, 2 days ago, when the federal government, including Justin Trudeau and the Housing Minister, Sean Fraser, agreed to give London, Ontario, the $74 million of its approximately $10 billion Housing Accelerator Fund. to fast-track the 2,000 additional housing units within 3 years and thousands more in future years. Within this agreement, London will allow the high-density development without the need for rezoning, which equals 4 units to be built on a single property, and allow this to happen within the low-density neighborhoods. Contained in a quote by Minister Fraser, the message given was aimed at every mayor, every council member in every city. And it was said that the city wanted the federal government to show up, and if they wanted financial investments to directly support the ability to build more homes, give them a reason. You've heard so many reasons put before this council in the past few days. The application portal, I understand, was opened to the local governments to submit their application plans 3 months ago. So with everything you've heard over the past few days and everyone's submissions, please take action, not just make approvals. Do what needs to be done. Thank you for attention to these matters, and thank you for the extra time. Appreciate that.
Councillor
No,
Dhaliwal?
thank you, Ms. Rogers.
Oh,
Thank you, Ms. Rogers, and like I said, thank you for coming in. I, as a Ward 5 representative, we have diversity. We have diversity and needs, diverse needs of housing, rental housing, social housing, non-market housing. So thank you for coming out and reiterating that there is need. Also, thank you for all your courage and staying tough in there, and all the best to your daughter, you said, who's going to university. Thank you. That's it for me, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Dhaliwal. Mayor Gondek.
Chair, you may have to cut me off because I'm breaking protocol. We're supposed to ask questions specifically, but I have to say, having sat through the conversion therapy hearings and having sat through the anti-racism hearings and now this, our protocol is brutal. I can't just say thank you to people who have been brave enough to come forward today to share their life stories. I have to ask them a question. So I'm completely breaking protocol, and you can cut me off if you like, but I just want to thank you for having the courage to be here. And our process is awful. We can't tell you that. Sir, you said, I love you. Thank you for that. We love you too. That's all.
Thank you. I committed to holding a safe space, and part of that is at times just acknowledging. I will remind everybody that we do have a social worker who is part of these hearings today. Wagita is just outside the door. If anyone is needing to have a conversation, that resource is there. The information is at the podiums, and it is important that we hear each other's stories. So thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you to this panel. There are no further questions for you. You can return to the gallery or get on with your day. Okay, I am going to go back a little bit, and I'm just going to recall some names, and we're going to try to get another panel up and together here. Okay. Chris Davis. Claudia Streibl. Max Callback. Tom Parasock. Adam Henry. Shelley Morrison. Michelle Tiz Atkinson. Chaz Smith. Bob Morrison. Bob, you're on the next panel. Sorry, do I hear someone on the line? Oh, okay. Rob Day. Samantha Stokes.
Ellie Morrison.
There is someone who is joining us remotely, and that's A-OK, and you're just not muted, and I'm not sure who you are. So if you are joining us remotely online, if you could just make sure that you're muted until your name is called, that would be great. Okay, so Bob Morrison is going to go. Bob, Samantha, you're going to be second in this panel. Akbar Nimji.
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Rob Days.
Hello, Madam Chair.
Hi, sorry, your name?
Chris Davis.
Okay, Chris, you'll be third in this panel.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So do I have Akbar Nimji? Christian Stevenson? Beth Riley?
Present remotely.
Okay, Beth, you will be number 4 on this panel. And
Thank
Anne Landry. Okay, you will be number 5. Okay, so the order is going to be Bob, Samantha, Chris, Beth, Anne. Okay, Bob, when you're ready, you're first.
I have a presentation.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Go.
My name is Bob Morrison. I'm here on behalf of the Rutland Park Community Association, which includes the neighborhoods of Rutland Park, Lincoln Park, and Curry. Access to affordable housing is critical. Our community hopes the housing strategy will make a positive, effective contribution to Calgary. This will, though, only happen if the strategy is revised. We appreciate the work of the task force, but we remain strongly opposed to RCG as base residential land use, removal of minimum parking requirements, exempting any development from a public hearing process, and reduction in municipal reserve. We also want small local park spaces, which are currently designated RC1, to be protected, and ask that you take the time to more completely engage with Calgarians before approving the strategy. Next slide, please. Our community is already housing diverse, with an extensive mixture of single-family, row house, and multifamily development. Blanket rezoning to RCG does nothing to enhance our community and will divert investment away from the parts of our community, like our major activity centers, where we are ready to see the growth needed for sustainability. In addition to penalizing our established community and others like it, blanket rezoning will be ineffective in increasing housing affordability for those who need it most. Council must reaffirm administration's commitment during the LAP process to no blanket rezoning. Next slide, please. Areas in our community are already designated for significant density and redevelopment. These areas are developing slowly. Blanket rezoning to RCG will further delay this development. It also will remove older bungalows from our affordable housing stock and displace the families living in them. On parking minimums, administration has made a start at dealing more realistically with the issue. Removing parking requirements, in our particular case, puts developers of apartment-style buildings at a competitive disadvantage. You don't want to tilt the playing field even further in favor of lower density, less climate-friendly development. Next slide, please. We have several parks and open spaces in our community. They are well used and treasured by our residents and our neighbors in surrounding communities. However, the land in our community dedicated to parks and open spaces is below the standard in the municipal development plan. As population increases, we will fall further behind. As the city searches for land for affordable housing, it is essential that parks and open spaces remain free from and unimpaired by development. No land should be removed from parks and open spaces, and municipal reserve should not decrease. Next slide, please. The housing strategy must focus specifically, if not exclusively, on the needs of lower income, especially single-family households. There is no greater need than that. In meeting that strategy, the city must incentivize the vital and unappreciated role laid by co-op housing, co-housing, and other types of cooperative living. Sarcee Meadows in our community is an excellent example of how cooperative housing can provide affordable housing. Co-op rental rates across the city vary from $800 per month for a 2-bedroom unit to less than $1,100 for a 4-bedroom unit. Those in need, in some cases, are eligible for a 30% reduction after 1 year. Next slide, please. Our community has land use to provide a wide variety of services and amenities. Housing growth needs to be where people, especially those in the greatest need, can easily access those services and amenities. Blanket rezoning and incentivizing $650,000 row houses in low-density areas will not accomplish that. Instead, support activity center development where it will contribute to affordability. Next slide, please. Last but not least, do not exempt any development from a public hearing, including affordable housing. No development should be above public scrutiny. Last slide, please. In summary, we recognize the need for and support the development of affordable housing in Calgary, but ask you to do so in a way that helps our communities and serves those in the greatest need. So yes to cooperative and co-op housing, bring density to activity centers, and preserve green space, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Samantha, you are next.
Good afternoon. My name is Samantha Stokes, and I've provided submissions to Council both as a board member of the Alboya Britannia Community Association, as well as myself personally. On behalf of our community association, we urge Council to, in particular, vote on each task force recommendation separately, and in particular, we encourage Council to vote against blanket upzoning and removal of parking minimums. However, I would like to take the rest of my time today to provide submissions in my personal capacity. All of my submissions are provided on a preliminary basis for this preliminary hearing, and further submissions will be forthcoming at a future public hearing to discuss and address changes to the land use bylaw should you vote yes. In his book, A Conflict of Visions, The Ideological Origins of Political Struggles, Stanford economics professor Thomas Sowell stated that there's no solutions, there are only trade-offs. No matter what decision you make to deal with this problem, it will impose a cost and create another problem. For the posterity of government largesse, that may be a good thing, but for taxpayers, it may mean imposing additional costs not borne by those who impose them. As a professional working in Calgary, a mother and a wife, I want to use my time today to discuss some of the trade-offs that the city is proposing to make on my family's behalf, and I ask you to consider 3 questions. First, compared to what, at what cost, and what hard evidence supports these policies. I live in Alboya in a bungalow from the 1950s. We moved there because of the proximity to Alboya School and the short commute to work. We made the trade-off of a newer home for an older home that needed work. In 2022, our son was born, and we started to make inquiry into the schools, the daycares, and doctors in the neighborhood. Not surprisingly, the school is almost at capacity, and it's pretty difficult to find doctors and schools. If we have more families at an increased density, where are they to go to school? Where are they supposed to send their kids to daycare? And where are they supposed to find a doctor? They'll have to commute. Commuting requires vehicles. So with more families, you're going to have more cars. The proposed elimination of parking minimums won't make families use public transit, but instead will create a demand for more parking. Inner city infrastructure was not designed for RCG neighborhoods. It was designed for RC1 with single families. As we've seen, for example, throughout Marda Loop, Altadore, and South Calgary, the introduction of denser forms leads to traffic congestion and associated issues with water, sewage, and other utilities, which were not designed for higher density. This imposes costs on all taxpayers. If poorer quality of education, increased traffic, and infrastructure are issues, are trade-offs and costs that taxpayers are willing to bear for the promise of affordable housing, then you ought to have concrete evidence that these policies will in fact increase affordability. No city policy will derogate from the fact that this is a boom and bust city whose economic fortunes rise and fall on the value of a commodity priced globally, not by this council. However, you do have the ability to put more money into people's pockets and increase the amount of money available for housing by cutting waste. We have seen continual increase to property taxes, making housing costs further out of reach. Why is there no pause or reduction on property taxes in order to put more money in people's pockets to afford rent or a mortgage? Why is there not the elimination of transit fees, crackdown on utility companies, or other methods of freeing up cash for taxpayers? What about streamlining the development permit process, decreasing associated fees, and speeding up time to hook up to city services? Eliminating parking minimums will create a higher demand for parking and a market for rental parking, which is not a cost currently borne by your residents. Inflation, which is a significant driver for the housing prices we are seeing, is fundamentally a fiscal and monetary policy driven phenomena, and no one here has the power of those factors. Those levers are pulled in Ottawa. Increasing density does nothing to affect these issues. Cost of construction and cost of borrowing are going to remain high. Market housing is not going to be affordable. The idea that any 15 people can solve a problem as complex as the housing market with little data and support, and that some of these people believe that they can, is troubling given the legitimate other problems that remain unsolved. Markets rise and fall, including the housing market, and if you think that you have the collective wisdom to bring down a bull market, you must also believe that you have the ability to prop up a bear market. How can you have the power to set a ceiling, but not a ground? Maybe you don't have the power to set either. In the interest of transparency, these marks are made contrary to my own pecuniary interest. If my RC1 house gets rezoned, I will be able to make a bundle developing my lot into several $1 million infills. By virtue of zoning, my lot will increase in value. If the policies work and the value of inner city lands decrease, I'll be in the position of snapping up more land. I take the last 2 seconds to address Vancouver, and I note that they had an internal city report questioning whether increased density is going to increase affordability, and I would encourage council to look at that. To date, I haven't seen any data which shows that increasing density is going to increase affordability. Rather, the evidence appears to show that it will decrease affordability. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. Chris, you are next.
Thank you. I'm just going to flip over to my speaking notes, which should be available. I want to thank Council for the opportunity today to speak at Council Committee. I'm speaking from a rooftop deck in Mission in Ward 8. I'm very pleased to be doing that. I'm outside, so I apologize if there's any background noise. I echo the statements that were just made by Samantha Stokes, who's a very knowledgeable lawyer in town, and I think she provided some really cogent remarks. I'm a municipal and planning lawyer with over 30 years experience. I'm a longtime community association volunteer. We currently live in North Glenmore in Ward 11, one of the more receptive communities for row-type RCG housing. I have made a written submission. It's in your materials. I will be speaking today, given the tight time window, on the legal issues that I see before Council. First of all, the letter of September 14 from Federal Minister, Housing Minister Sean Fraser is hugely disappointing, as it apparently weaponizes the Housing Accelerator Fund by holding federal funding in the balance pending land use redesignations to seemingly blanket upzone for RCG and HGO. The discussion about a uniform low-density RCG district is premature until such time as public engagement on any proposed land use bylaw or statutory plan amendments is appropriately presented to the community. Council, owing to its legal obligations to maintain neutrality, must, quote, remain open to persuasion from the 1990 Supreme Court of Canada Old St. Boniface decision. I urge Council not to make any promises to deliver on all the Affordable Housing Task Force recommendations, particularly the objectives under 1 sub C, without clear provisos or cautions spelled out. And if it means foregoing the accelerator funding to remain lawful, I encourage Council to do so. Clearly, neither the current practice of spot zoning nor the proposal for blanket upzoning can adequately respond to housing affordability. I will otherwise keep my powder dry on all planning matters until those matters are before the entire community via the proper forum, which will be through engagement, Planning Commission, and a public hearing at Council. I want to again thank all members of Council, administration, the staff that put together the opportunity for us to call in and speak virtually. And those are my comments, and I understand I'm in to remain on the line if there's any questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Beth, you are the next speaker. Beth Riley.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Beth Riley. I'm here appearing on behalf of myself. I would like first to thank Mayor Gondek and the councillors for allowing us to have this opportunity. I am not an expert. I am, however, a longtime resident of Calgary, and I've witnessed some significant changes in the city throughout the course of the years. As background note, although not necessarily relevant, I am a homeowner, but I did grow up in Calgary in rental homes because my family could not afford buying a house. That being said, it was a fantastic opportunity, and I am grateful for the life that I had. I've read the task force report and recommendations, and I've listened to the submissions over this past 2 days. I acknowledge that there is an acute housing crisis in Calgary, and I'm only speaking to Calgary, and it has a significant and, quite truthfully, devastating human impact. It's clear that immediate action is required, and for those reasons, I do support the recommendations set forth by the committee. In the truest sense, and again, perhaps, I don't know, being maybe not, change is required, and change in terms of increased densification, increased diversity, and increased affordability is required, and it's required in all communities in the city. And we do need, quite truthfully, to continue to welcome new people to Calgary, and we have to make sure that we have the ability to offer security of housing. I think I've heard a couple people indicate that there's a right to own a house. I believe that there is I do not agree with that, but I do agree that there certainly is a right to affordable housing that should be provided. And unfortunately, the pain that is being felt is at the local level, and it's the city that, notwithstanding our comments about the federal government, it is up to the city to take action, and I applaud the city in that regard. All of that being said, I do have significant concerns with the implementation and certain actions that are put forth under the recommendations. I agree wholeheartedly with, I believe, Bob's submission from Rutland Park, the first speaker of this panel, and I do so for specific reasons. I believe that the City of Calgary has an obligation to make it easier to build affordable and diverse housing across the city, including densification of incumbent residential communities, including the community that I live in, Elbow Park. So I fully, for example, permit secondary suites, backyard suites on parcels of land, and in addition to multi-residential mixed-use buildings. However, I am strongly opposed to the elimination of public hearings and also to a default zoning of RCG when it is not combined with a cogent plan. And the problem is that the removal of the zoning and the removal of public hearings removes all discretion and oversight that is necessary for thoughtful development and would lead to irresponsible development. This is not a condemnation of developers or people in the real estate industry, but this is recognizing that people are motivated by profit-maximizing behavior, and especially in a tight labor market, people are not going to be building affordable, diverse housing if it does not serve them and unless there's a profit, unless it's profitable. And for that reason, I look to an example of these excellent examples that are throughout the city of responsible development. I highlight in particular Curry Barracks and Bridgeland. Those are thoughtful, they're inclusive developments, and but what is important is they have developed and associated with infrastructure that supports that development. However, as everyone knows, there's multiple examples of irresponsible development throughout the city, and including, for example, Marta Loop, which is just chaos at the moment. Now, a lot of people probably have made a lot of money, and it's certainly a desirable neighborhood, but it is not thoughtful development, and it could have been planned a bit more responsibly. And quite truthfully, I don't think that has resulted in a lessening or a provision of additional affordable housing. And when you look at the City of Toronto has a report from 2021 called Report for Action Effective Public Participation in the City. And what they've indicated is that community engagement is an important part of city building activities. It provides an opportunity for community members to share their thoughts and ideas on change in their communities, help identify opportunities and challenges that change brings, and builds relationships, trust, and transparency between the city and the public. When done right, community engagement results in new and innovative ideas, better decisions, and stronger communities. So the sum up is, this is especially so in our case, in the city of Calgary. The city needs a plan. It has to require and demand development and increased diversity, affordable living, and density in all communities. I think there's an immediate urgency from the submissions we've had for the past few days and the numbers that we're getting for immediate resolution in, quite truthfully, downtown Calgary that can accommodate people who have the most dire inability of affordable or any security of housing right now. But the key is, I believe, we need a strategy. Yeah.
Your time is up, so thank you for presenting with us today. And you are next.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Mayor Gondek and Council, for this opportunity to speak regarding the City of Calgary's new housing strategy. My name is Anne Landry. For the past 25 years or more, I have rented the same one-bedroom and den apartment in the Beltline, Ward 8, an apartment operated by Boardwalk REIT, one of the largest financialized landlords in Canada. I am again being rent gouged by Boardwalk REIT, $185 per month, a 17.4% increase in 2 installments at a time that the Alberta Residential Tenancies Act clearly allows landlords to increase rents only 1 time a year. I have a disability, post-traumatic stress. I will soon be of retirement age. I have a career background that includes strategic planning and data analytics. I have not worked in my career since the 2015 recession. I have provided Boardwalk over $300,000 in rent over time, and I would like to age in place. As per the slide on the overhead, I am a Calgarian for Housing is a Human Right, and earlier this week led the Housing Hope community meeting here in Calgary with other human rights advocates. I have provided a brief to the House of Commons Human Committee review regarding financialization and rent gouging, including involving harassment of me to the point of threats to terminate my lease that I have requested Sam Coleus, Boardwalk REIT CEO, to address at the Human Committee review. Financialization is using housing as a for-profit investment and not as a social good, a basic human right. As well, I have provided a brief to the National Housing Council review regarding financialization of primary rental markets. In part, my recommendations include declare a housing emergency in Calgary and implement a national rent freeze, eviction freeze, and lower rents in cases of rent gouging. See my change.org petition entitled Require Landlords to Appear Before the House of Commons Review of Financialization and Rent Gouging. This echoes the request of the Federal Housing Advocate. In signing up to speak before Council, I checked the box on the online form saying I don't support the new strategy. I strongly support housing as a human right. Affordable, adequate, accessible housing, secure tenure housing, but there are key gaps in the City of Calgary's housing strategy that urgently need to be addressed at the time of Calgary's growing housing emergency, including to move to a multi-pronged strategy such as was recommended by Marie-Josée Houle, Federal Housing Advocate at the House of Commons Human Committee. She stated, I think it's a multi-pronged approach. Stop the loss, curb the financialization, make it less profitable, and give opportunities for non-market actors to acquire. I recommend the City of Calgary Council make the following 5 broad amendments to the housing strategy. Number 1, all levels of government declare an immediate housing emergency in Calgary and take immediate steps this week to protect renters, the vulnerable, and as well as the supply of affordable, accessible, adequate, secured housing, as well as land. Rent caps are the right thing to do as a key element of a multi-pronged strategy. Legally right, morally right, time effective, cost effective. Marie-Josée Houle, federal housing advocate, now speaks of Canada's housing emergency and has recommended enduring rent controls and tenant protections. Tim Richter, CEO of Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, has said at the Human Review that Canada right now is under a wave of new homelessness on the same scale as Canada's largest natural disasters. People are being pushed out of their housing by huge increases in cost of rent, he said. Number 2, move immediately to a housing human right model with an independent expert commissioner and accountability reporting to council, including with quarterly reviews, public dashboard tracking, and an external expert consultant to lead a human rights needs assessment with wide public engagement. Housing as a human right is the law. The city's new housing strategy lacks the comprehensiveness of planning and accountability that is evident in the Vancouver Progress Report 2022 annual update. Use the standard CMHC definition of affordable housing in Canada. The City of Calgary routinely does not refer to the fact that over 126,000 households, 22% in Calgary, cannot afford shelter. That's Census 2021. That's 42% of households earning under $100,000. Use the HART, Housing Assessment Needs Assessment Tool, the emerging standard in Canada for build targets for the most vulnerable and to identify priority populations. Implement landlord licensing with ESG tracking, fines, and fees. Number 3, stop the loss of affordable housing, including due to financialization of housing. Research by expert Steve Pomeroy reveals that 15 are lost for every 1 affordable housing built. Number 4, curtail predatory financialization of housing. Research by Canadian expert Martine August reveals that financialization of housing is a failed affordable housing model and that it is harms-based. Financialization of housing was created by policy in the 1990s. At the time, the federal government let the market take over and the provinces stepped out of rent control. Policy created and your policy can end it now.
Your time is up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us here today. So that brings us to the end of the panel. There are questions. Councillor Walcott, go ahead.
Thank you. First question is to Bob. Thank you for being here, Bob. I kind of want to ask you to put on all of your hats because you speak at council a lot, especially with regards to climate. You've, in the past, spoken against sprawl, and now you're speaking against established area density.
No, I'm not. No, we're not. We are asking for
so
more.
I'll rephrase. What type of housing do you want developed that'll be enough to keep pace with population growth to avoid sprawl?
Could you bring up the PowerPoint again?
Please, yeah.
And I think it's the 3rd slide. Do you see that waste? Do you see that wasteland? Do you see those houses going in? The row houses on the right-hand side are
Could I
being
be
built?
clear? This is a picture of Curry Barracks?
Sorry?
This is a picture of Curry Barracks?
It's part of the Rutland community. We are 3 neighborhoods.
Yes, I'm just asking. That's a picture of Curry Barracks?
Yes, that's
Okay.
Curry Barracks.
And those sites are all slated for development, correct?
Yes, they are. And we want those to be developed. We want that density because, first of all, that's where our activity center is going to be in the future. Our center of gravity for development is gradually moving east towards Curry. That's where you're seeing services down in the Lincoln Park area. You're going to see services in this area. Yep. This is where we want density. This is not NIMBYism on our part.
No, my question is, when you hear the numbers of 100,000 people coming in 4 years, do you have you think there are enough locations like this to accommodate 100,000 people in this city who have families, who have kids, in locations like this?
Okay, two answers to that. First of all, ask administration. They have not done the housing and land supply study that you need right now to be able to say where that is. They have not defined the activity centers and main streets in terms of the density that they expect that they will accommodate.
I'm going to push back because I disagree.
Sorry?
I do not believe that is true. I think they have done that. We have that information.
They've done it in places like Crescent Heights, I believe, but they have not done it in terms of where exactly do activity centers and main streets begin and end. And they have the density requirements in the municipal development plan, yes, but what does that actually mean when you put it in the city and in particular in the local area planning process? There's one local area planning process where the people actually asked, how many people, how much housing do you expect to accommodate in our local area?
Sure.
And the planners were unable to give them the answer.
Yes,
Now,
because
maybe
there are no population maximums are not a good policy, especially in communities like Rutland Park where your population is decreasing.
But you have to start someplace.
Council Walcott, I'm going to remind you, we ask questions of panelists. We don't debate with
I appreciate it. I apologize.
It's just a note for everybody.
The reason why I wanted to ask that question is because one of your comments was around families. Is that families are those who are most in need. Yes. And so I'm curious if you're aware that when you look at the housing and needs assessments, that it's actually singles that are the most in need in the city.
Yes, I think I'm hearing your question right.
Yeah. You had said that families are the most in need, so I wonder if you could clarify how families are the most in need versus the data that we have available. That
okay, well, you have a number that somebody has come up with in terms of affordable housing. For us, the housing in need is that standard of 30% of your income if you're earning less than 65% of the median. That's the kind of households you're looking at from our point of view. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure it did.
Not quite. It's less of, I'm trying to ask you to qualify why you would say that like families are I'll move on. It's not too important at the moment. When you're looking at development in Rutland Park, have you seen a lot of development in your time on the board?
Okay, are you talking about the Rutland Park neighborhood or the entire community?
Rutland Park neighborhood, because Curry Barracks is a growing neighborhood, so it would be insincere to ask about Curry Barracks.
And we look at it as a whole, because the whole community is looking at what it's going to do for us. There has been some development. Some of it has been controversial, some of it has actually been acceptable to the community. But it's the kind of development that if you have it in the Rutland neighborhood, where it is primarily single family in most of the area, that you're not actually going to be getting the density, and I think some other speakers spoke to that. And you're also not bringing it to this area in the east where our main part of services and development are going to be going in the future. So it's working against us to have that development over there, and in fact it's kind of exacerbating the sprawl, the old kind of sprawl that we had before. You're just putting more of the people in the wrong place. In a sense, we're saying yes for development, but put it in the right place where the services and amenities are. And if you go to the, I think it's the 5th slide. Nope, keep going. Maybe another one. There you go. Most of this development that you're seeing here in these pictures is on that east side. This is where, you've got we got the fire station, we've got the Dollarama, we've got the Mount Royal University, we've got churches, we've got schools, we've got the bus service, which even though we didn't get the LRT, we have some excellent bus service when you think about that, in terms of going many directions from where we are. That's all on the east side of our community, and that's where we want to see the development, particularly for those people who are in the greatest needs of having to access those services.
I've walked Rutland Park, and so when you're thinking about walkability, I believe the plan is, of course, for another grocery store to go into Curry. How long would you say it would take to walk to the 2 different grocery stores that you will have around you in the near future?
Which neighborhood are you talking about?
On Rutland Park, because on one behind you have the Safeway, and then eventually you'll have another one in Curry.
How long does it take me to walk to the bus? It would probably take 15 minutes for most people in the Rutland neighborhood to walk there, yes.
And is that unreasonable?
Sorry?
Is that unreasonable?
For somebody who is disabled, yes, I would think it would be in terms of walking. For somebody who is time constrained, as a lot of us are, I think that would probably discourage them from instead of getting into their car and walking, they would take their car.
And so then this is why I asked you to put on your climate hat. You support, it sounds like you're suggesting that there will always, that we need to keep certain neighborhoods car dependent.
I think because of previous council's decisions, car dependency is going to be, unfortunately, from my point of view as a climate advocate, going to be the future. But you want to minimize that as much as possible.
Okay, I'm going to end up arguing. Never mind.
Okay, can I follow up with one other comment in
No,
response?
there's no other questions to you at
Nope.
this time. Thank you.
I'm cut off?
Okay. There has to be a question posed to you. Councillor Carra.
Thank you. My questions are for Mr. Chris Davis.
Hi, Councillor.
How are you, sir?
I'm well. I'm sitting outside and enjoying the beautiful weather.
Enjoy. Okay, my first question, I'm going to sort of I'm going to pick your brain on as a municipal law planning expert. I've always been amused at the preponderance of spot zoning being used to describe one-off zoning redesignations by opponents of neighborhood change. Because as we know, there is no such thing as spot zoning, there's zoning. And now I'm extra amused that we have the emergence of a new term, blanket zoning. So I would love to hear your thoughts as a municipal planning law expert on zoning in general, with the understanding that, is there spot zoning? Is there blanket zoning? Or are these politically charged terms to describe a legal process that council is tasked to preside over?
Well, thank you, Councillor Carra, and I appreciate your kind recognition. I will always defer to your lawyers at the city. You've got some great lawyers. So I will say, in my own opinion, that the term spot zoning has been around for decades. I'm sure it's referred to repeatedly in Fred Locke's and Gwendolyn Stewart Palmer's book on planning in Alberta. So it's a thing. And I don't know if it's fair to say it's politically charged. Words that start out being technical terms over time can evolve and become politically charged. So I agree with you when you say there's zoning. And in fact, in Calgary, it's districting, not the term that most people will use. So when it comes down to it, I think it still exists. And the challenge, I think, for council in all of these continued one-off applications, and I appreciate that council did the right thing in doing a blanket move to rezone for secondary suites, given all of the time spent on the one-off applications. Here, we're challenged with something that is changing potentially the fabric of existing communities. So all I can say from a legal perspective is each application stands on its own merits. Council will deal with each application as they come forward. And I'm certainly keeping my powder dry on anything to do with planning because as we, I think, appreciate now, this committee meeting is really focused on affordability and on housing options, and the land use issue is yet to come. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I appreciate your opining on the subject. It sort of segues into my next question because you've sort of preluded the idea that council pursuing bylaws, actual zoning changes, if this committee hearing leads to a council decision to pursue raising the base of entitlement across the city to more of an RG environment like we have in the suburbs, you've suggested that could be illegal in your remarks. You've suggested that that there is significant overreach from the Liberal federal housing minister, who basically told us to do that, to pursue the policy objectives before us, or potentially face the danger of not being eligible for significant housing funds from the federal government. My question specifically to you is, as a card-carrying conservative, as someone who has run for conservative positions, this liberal position that you're calling out as potentially illegal is fairly tepid compared to the conservative leaders, the conservative federal leaders' policy on housing and what he will expect municipalities to do to remove their gatekeeper status and open up the opportunity to house Canadians. So can you maybe give us a little bit of thoughts on that?
Because I might not be able to. I got to go.
Thank you. Good question. I was responding to the immediate.
Chris, just hold on for 2 seconds. If you're tuning in remotely, if you are not Chris, can you please just double check that your device is muted? Okay, go ahead, Chris.
Yes, thanks, Councillor. I was responding to the most immediate issue, which was the very current letter from the housing minister. I have to agree, even though my experience recently has been provincial, federally, I think the policy is similar to the Liberal policy, and I frankly don't agree with it. I think it's not nuanced. They're not understanding the challenges in a localized context of talking about doing blanket and sweeping changes to what is entirely a provincial and municipal issue. So I agree at all levels of government, there has to be more done, but we also have to respect the fabric of existing communities. So I will equally swing a bat at federal statements from the minister and also from the leader of the Conservative Party or other MPs who think there's a simplistic solution to housing affordability and that municipalities can solve everything. Municipalities can't, and you're being tasked with a really tough job. And I was just saying, pursuant to the law, anybody who says you have to solve something right away without going through the proper due process of public hearing, I think that's just improper. And so I'm just suggesting, and you'll get legal advice, be careful. Don't make decisions. Don't make it look like on paper that council has made any predetermination of outcome. Because what will happen is, you'll face the risk of being challenged for not being, having an open mind when the actual land use comes forward to council.
Well, yeah, I appreciate the fact that when it comes to public hearings in front of council regarding land use matters, we must remain amenable to persuasion. But as you know, there is rich veins of policy law. I will just, not to debate from the questioner, but I will just suggest that no one has suggested that this is a simplistic situation that we're confronted by. And certainly no one has suggested it is any one order of government's sole responsibility. So I would caution you to not make broad, sweeping simplifications like that. I think we all understand the complexity before
carefully, Councillor Carra.
I'm done speaking. Thank you.
Councillor Meehan.
Thanks. My question's for Bob. Hi, Bob. I just want to make sure I understood what you're saying. So you're suggesting that you're not against intercity intensification at all, but that you want to see RCG on nodes and corridors. That's where you'd like to see it?
We don't need RCG on those in the main activity areas. We've already got it. I don't even know what the zoning is. But
Okay.
That wasteland that I was showing you in front of that development, we've already got the zoning to go ahead. In fact, we're seeing developers put in less than what the zoning would allow.
Right, okay.
Which we consider unfortunate in that area, but it is happening.
Right, I guess my question is like, it is there in nodes and corridors because that's what the city policy already largely allows, as you have stated, and so you're not advocating for that, but you're saying don't blanket zone it because we have space for it in these other places. Is that correct?
Right, because the blanket rezoning will drive investment and housing away from our activity center. And this isn't a corridor, this is an activity center.
I guess my question is that like putting putting like everything on nodes and corridors is exactly the planning policy that Vancouver and Toronto and many other major cities have done. And it hasn't worked. And the main reason it hasn't worked or hasn't been enough is because nodes and corridors make up such a small percentage of our overall landmass. And so I guess my question to you is, why should we, and now these places are actually looking at upping their base district, right? This is the conversation that has already happened in Toronto, it's happening in Vancouver, it's happening in Calgary, is we actually need to upzone the entire city. So I guess I'm wondering, why should we stick with something that we have watched not work in other cities before, why stick to that? We've seen that not play out, and that's what you're suggesting we continue to do, and so I'm just trying to understand that.
Okay, we have not been continuing to do that here in Calgary. The municipal development plan specifically directs administration to direct activity to those activity centers development to those activity centers and main streets. And that has not been the policy of previous city councils, and as a result, administration has not been doing it. The planning and the development that has been promoted in the past has been suburban development, not the activity centers and main streets. I would be very interested in the information that you have that sort of thing has somehow failed in other communities. So if one of your assistants could pass that to me, I'd appreciate it.
Well, I think we see it in terms of the cost of housing. I also think we have to distinguish between activity centers, which have much higher density, and then just other types of corridors that we see.
Okay, so you're talking about the cost of housing rather than development. Okay, I understand where you're coming from now. The cost of housing is a major problem regardless of how you develop. If you put blanket RCG zoning into the Rutland Park community, for example, you are not going to have a substantial impact you probably have no impact for those people who are at the lower end of the economic scales. Because what we're seeing are those $650,000 townhouses going in. Those are not affordable. They are not going to be rented by people who are on the lower ends of the economic ladder. That is where we're coming from, because all of us, I think virtually all of us in our community, have in one way or another seen homelessness, seen people who can't afford housing, or when we were starting out, or even now that we're into our older lives, some of us are in those positions where we could find ourselves, what's the term that you use, equity deserving. So we understand those things, and that's the kind of housing that we want to see developed, and this is the place that we want to see it happen.
I guess my question now as a follow-up is, why wouldn't we give every individual citizen the same right to develop their parcel? And the reason I say that is because if we restrict where the bigger projects can go, that leads to what Anne was talking about earlier around the financialization of housing. Right. And so I guess I'm just trying to understand how you see that, how your proposal gets around that.
Okay, the financialization of housing worries us, quite honestly. However, right now you have certain zoning in, say, the Rutland Park community that can allow people to develop. If somebody wants to come forward with a proposal that would allow a higher density development, well, then let them come forward. And we'll certainly consider it, and in some cases we've been supportive of the kinds of development that the proposals that have come forward. We're just saying that if you're talking about development as a whole within our community, we want to see development driven this direction. That is not to say that people can't develop their own property in some fashion, or at least try to.
Okay.
Okay. Is that answering your question?
I think what I'm a little bit confused about is that the bigger the project, the harder it is for an individual to do, right? And so if everyone has the same right to do an RCG project, then in theory, it's going to become a lot easier. We've heard from a lot of developers and folks saying you have to be quite sophisticated to add any density to your property. And so if we allow certain things by right, every mom and pop would have the ability to, hey, I can make my house into a duplex, versus constraining that to certain areas, which then increases the financialization risk, and so you have to be more sophisticated to do it.
Nothing in our proposal put that kind of constraint on things, because they do have that right anyway. But the person from Round Square this morning was making that argument. that if you opened it up, it would give them greater latitude to be able to develop those things. And that's recognized. But again, from our point of view, that ability already exists. It just doesn't happen. It just happens to not be in this blanket way that you are seeing in the housing strategy. Okay, we're looking after our community. That's what we're trying to do. And this is the kind of wasteland that has been developing slowly, and we want to see it come as quickly as possible so we can have that increase in what is becoming our activity center.
Right. I guess the only follow-up I will have is you're saying like it doesn't develop here because it ends up developing elsewhere, like in the Greenfield, where it is base RG communities.
That's another argument for another day, and you will continue to hear from other groups that I'm involved with on that.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
Councillor Chabot.
Thanks, Mr. Morrison. If you don't mind, just a few more minutes of your time. Thank you for being here. Very interesting perspective that you provided to members of the committee. Through the LAP process, we've sort of identified areas where RCG and HCO type development would occur, but a lot of it is been directed to nodes and corridors or neighborhood flex and neighborhood connectors. Do you see that as a mechanism by which we could look at city-initiated redesignations to identify those areas that would be most suited for that type of development?
That's what we're not in an LAP at the present time.
Right.
But that's what we thought the process was supposed to be doing. And I don't know, quite honestly, how this particular proposal is going to affect that in any substantial way.
Yeah. And obviously, we're moving forward in an accelerated fashion on doing those LAPs, as was indicated in the last budget discussions, as far as how much we've invested in that department specifically for that purpose. But you see that as a mechanism whereby we could sensitively intensify and preserve those higher density type developments, such as what you were pointing out in those main streets, for higher density type development.
Now, you are preserving the lower density areas is what you were saying?
No, I'm suggesting that through the LAP process, we could identify some of those areas that would be most suited for that type of RG while preserving those higher density opportunities in the main streets for something of greater significance.
Okay, you could look at it that way. With another group that I'm involved with, we've been asking community leaders about what would be needed in the communities across the city. And one of the things that came out of our survey was the current static definition of main streets and activity centers that the city has is woefully inadequate. There are many other main street areas, primarily community neighborhood types of developments, and activity centers that could be, if you talk to the community, could be candidates for development. And that could be the way that you could get this kind of RCG zoning into the right place for those communities. They would actually be in activity centers. They would be along main streets. And I think in the last public hearing you had, 24th Avenue, despite what the city has said about what is an activity center, what is a main street, up in the Northwest is starting to be treated that way by developers and, at least through acquiescence, if nothing else, by the community. So there's a lot more out there than is what is currently in the MDP.
Interesting. Thank you. Thanks. No further questions for you, but I do have questions for Mr. Davis, if you're still online.
Yes, Councillor, I'm still around.
Yes, thank you. You raised an interesting point about the remaining amenable to persuasion. So this proposal that's before us, it is your professional opinion that if we move towards this blanket rezoning and we use the argument that it's required for us to move forward on this because it's dependent on us to move forward to get federal funding, that it in essence removes our unbiased position?
Through the chair to Councillor Chabot, First of all,
Chris,
I can't give you...
Chris?
Yes. Hello?
Yeah, can you hold on for a second?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, and I need
Yep.
you to hold on for a second. Committee, I have received a note from legal that we need to be very careful in our questioning. We cannot ask legal advice. So if you are asking Mr. Davis to weigh in as a lawyer,
No, I asked only for his opinion.
you ask for his professional opinion. And so
say
I
professional.
am going to ask that we think very carefully, because otherwise I know Ms. Flowen is going to turn her microphone on, and I don't think we want that. So, Mr. Davis, please don't respond to that. Councillor Chabot, I'm going to give you a second to, do you need to rethink your question? Should I go to Councillor Mulcahy and give you a second?
No, I can talk some more with Mr. Davis. So, Mr. Davis, do you have concerns beyond the potential, I guess, bias as far as redesignating a large swath of the single-family residential communities that I didn't maybe quite understand in your proposal, such as quality of life or anything? Did you make reference to any of that?
Through the chair, first of all, I was going to say I can't give legal advice. I'm employed elsewhere. I'm not insured to give legal advice. So I'm not giving legal advice. I'm providing my own views, and I think, they are what they are. And the views I provided earlier were simply that please, council, make sure that you're not feeling bound by something that's irrelevant to ultimately a planning decision has to go through a public process. So that's all that conversation was about. My letter that came in on my behalf, that's in the materials, speaks to concerns overall about process and about community and about choice. And I look forward to the public hearing process and the engagement that will allow all of Calgarians to weigh in on the planning issues, the MDP, the land use bylaw, the statutory plans, the LAPs. That's all to come. So this matter today is part of the process, but there's lots more to come. And I think that's all I was saying.
Okay. Just one last question. What is your understanding of the elimination of urban form category as one of the proposals? I think it's not exactly how it's worded, but something like that. What are your thoughts about that?
For the chair, there's a proposal to eliminate a range of I'll call low-density form and to combine it into one uniform opportunity. And it will still have, as I understand it, it will still have a subcategories of single detached, semi-detached, multi-row housing. It'll have all those opportunities. It's just that they're now all available and possibly permitted, no doubt discretionary. So I don't think anything's being eliminated. What's being eliminated is the traditional historical RC1, R1 uniform type community. And that's one of the big questions that will ultimately come forward when the planning issues come back to council.
Okay. Yeah, no, I don't think most people understand that specific little reference there, but thanks for pointing that out. No further questions.
And thanks for your question, and I appreciate the context and the legal concerns. Thank you.
Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. And stick around there, Chris. Quick question, or Mr. Davis. Would I be correct in saying that you came here to speak as a resident of Calgary and not as a spokesperson for the federal or provincial Conservative parties?
That is correct.
Yeah, that's what I figured, but yet we've seen a couple of times now where people with ties have been questioned or expected people to defend them. We haven't seen any other presenters that may have ties to Liberal or NDP party to maybe defend their policies or speak to them. So, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was clarified. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Chu.
Thank you. My question will be for Mr. Morrison, Bob Morrison.
He's at the podium. Go ahead, Councillor Chu.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob, for being here. And I just want to give you opportunity. Earlier, when you're being badgered and you didn't finish at the end, you were going to say something, but now's the opportunity. I'm asking right now, what do you need to say?
You're talking to an old man, so my memory does not extend much further back than that. So I can't answer it, quite honestly.
Oh, yeah. Earlier, Councillor Carra was talking to you, asking question. And at the end, you said, oh, can I add something? And the chair said, no, because no one's asking. So I'm asking now.
I'm afraid I can't
Point of
remember
privilege.
what, I can't even remember what the question was.
So Councillor Chu and Councillor Carra, as the chair, I'm just generally going to weigh in. Let's ask a very specific question. I think Mr. Morrison has indicated he can't. So Councillor Chu, if you recall and you wanted to re-ask the question, then I think that would be good for you to do.
Just a point of privilege, Madam Chair. I never questioned Bob Morrison, which was the premise of Councillor Chu's question. I just want, for the record, to state that.
It was Councillor Walcott.
Okay, sorry, Councillor Walcott. My apology, Councillor Carra.
Anyway, ask me a question. I'll try to give you an answer.
So, okay. So, see, I'm going to ask something, see if you can remember. And so my question is, how you think this should go? What do you think council should do?
I will speak to a couple things because this is a fairly broad issue, very complicated. In terms of the RCG, you should take that back to each of the communities, and maybe it's through the local area planning process, and then decide where this kind of rezoning would be appropriate. In terms of parking, minimum parking requirements, which concerns us, the city administration is doing the right thing by stepping back from that to see how it fits with affordability. We think that's a positive step forward. And in our particular case, particularly for apartment buildings where they have to provide underground parking, it puts them at a competitive disadvantage. At least that's what we're being told by apartment developers. So that would be two main things. The third one would be particularly on green spaces. Please continue not to take any more green space away from people. It's a limited resource, a very valuable resource. And for those local area, those small plots that still ended up somehow being zoned RC1 that are open spaces or parks, please get them back, and I can't remember the right designation, to something that will protect them, leave them unimpaired as parks in the future. So those would be the main three things that we would recommend.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you again. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There are no further questions for this panel. Thank you all for being here with us today. All right, I am going to go back just a little bit and call some names. Rob Day, Akbar Nimji, Christian Stevenson, Kyle Parrott, Tony Morris, Ken Young. You can make your way over there. Tom Spenceley, Grayson Witcher, Scott Laird, Art Matsui, that's Art. That's your sir walking to the podium. That's Art. Kate. Heather Kiesman, Evan Torn Thomas, Kristy Hysert, Barbara Streibl.
Present on the phone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who was that with us?
Sorry, it's Kristy Hysert, present on the phone.
Okay, Kristy, you're going to be number 3 in this panel, okay?
Thank you.
Barbara Streibl.
Grayson Witcher's on the phone here. Sorry, too.
Oh, and Grayson? Okay, so Grayson, you will be number 4. Barbara, if you want to make your way over, you'll be number 5. So that means then it was Ken, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it will go Ken, Art, Kristy, Grayson, Barbara. And for those who are joining us online remotely, if you can just make sure that you're muted until you are called again. So Ken, when you're ready.
Thank you. I had a presentation that was part of this.
Okay, I will, if you just give clerks a second, they'll get that ready for you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Penner, Mayor Gondek, and members of City Council. My name is Ken Young, and I live in the community of Windsor Park. Thank you for the opportunity to present my view on the housing strategy. Although these are my opinions, I know that they are shared by many in my community. While many of the recommendations of the housing strategy are indeed very commendable, I have particular concern over the impact of the blanket change of base residential zoning to RCG. Many will frame this as NIMBYism, but as you will see, Windsor Park is anything but NIMBY. I want to illustrate this at 2 levels, one at the household level and one at the community level. Next slide, please. First of all, let me show you a simple illustration that I am witnessing of the effect of row housing development on housing availability and affordability. Typically, what is being targeted is a modest 1960s or 70s bungalow, likely rented by a couple of tenants. A developer buys this property for land value, the tenants are given notice to vacate, and the land is no longer part of the residential inventory. After the process for building a new row house is run through various stages, new owners move in 18 to 24 months down the road. So let's be honest that the near-term impact in this displacement is the displacement of households, the loss of available housing. Under the current environment, this could be described as fuel on the fire. Next slide, please. And what do we get as a result of this new build? We most likely end up with less affordable housing. The modest bungalow units might have been renting out for something in the range of $1,200 to $1,500 a month. After this property sits vacant for a couple of years, new owners will have the privilege of paying conservatively $600,000 to $700,000 per unit, likely more given inflationary pressures on building. It is disingenuous to say that in these circumstances that this part of the housing strategy addressed the affordability challenges. In fact, my conclusion is that it will contribute to the problem. Next slide, please. Windsor Park is not dominated by single detached housing. In fact, we have a density more than 2.5 times the city average, and over 70% of it is high density households. This is not a characteristic of a NIMBY neighborhood. It is a model of housing diversity. Next slide, please. This map shows the partial impact of a proliferation of row house development in my community, the red. Based on the vintage of houses, a significant percentage of end lots would be attractive for developers to tear down and replace with row housing. The potential impact of this on our neighborhood would be more than half of our street frontage replaced with row housing. This comes with no plan for parking and large-scale destruction of a large part of the canopy of mature trees. Single and semi-detached homes would be reduced to perhaps less than 20% of the households in the community. Next slide, please. When my community presented our concerns with the proliferation of rezoning we were witnessing in July, this is some of what we heard from council. This is a free-for-all. This is too much for this community, not the right time or place for this application. So the answer is we're never going to say no to these. We just try to fix the problems that are created by them. We haven't spent enough time talking about established areas. Really will push for better strategy in established areas. Blanket rezoning without the context of a local area plan sweeps all these legitimate concerns under the blanket. Next slide, please. I believe that there is a path to a win-win that offers more and higher density housing while also preserving diversity of housing in this neighborhood. Accelerate densification of community corridors and main streets. Accelerate development of underutilized land adjacent to McLeod Trail. It never ceases to amaze me that there is a city-operated impound lot covering what I calculate to be about 4 hectares immediately adjacent to the 39th Avenue LRT. A couple of larger multi-unit residential buildings would provide as many households as a wall of row houses on every north-south street in Windsor Park, with no displacement of current residents. And finally, please accelerate the LAP process. 2 years is too long. You should demand that administration cut this in half. Then we can proceed with the development in a manner that is more collaborative, adding houses while also providing contextual safeguards for communities. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ken. Right on time. Art, you are next.
My name is Art Matsui, and I am opposed to the blanket upzoning of Calgary to a base zoning of RCG in order to supposedly increase affordable housing. I am a senior, and I've lived in the inner city established neighborhood of Ramsey for 40 years and have served as the development chair for the Community Association in the past. The base zoning for all of Ramsey is RC2, meaning laneway housing, secondary suites are allowed uses in our area. I listened to yesterday's hearing and I have this critique. The majority talked about the need for affordable housing or below market housing, which is a relative term, but what they really meant is subsidized housing, which is an absolute term. Also, I'm not sure most understood what contextual zoning means in the inner city because most were suburban, but that's a longer answer than I have today. First off, blanket upzoning is lazy planning to address the affordable housing issue, and in fact will cause more issues than it addresses. The upzoning automatically increases property values and bare land values and takes existing affordable housing out of affordability. It will also raise property taxes in the areas that are more desirable, like the inner city, due to inequitable land value increases and drive fixed income seniors to the bedroom communities. Second, the city's definition of affordable housing is flawed. Affordable housing means 15% below market value, which does not mean affordable for everyone, especially in the inner city developed areas. The city has offered upzoning in return for affordable housing for many years. In return for 10% affordable housing, a developer gets increased density. In a small 10 to 20 unit building, that means 1 or 2 units will be sold for 15% below market value. If the average price is $500,000, you could list 1 or 2 of the smallest undesirable 1-bedroom units for $425,000 and fulfill this affordable housing obligation. This does absolutely nothing for families looking for their first home. The only incentive for developers to provide below-market housing is increased profit. The more affordable source of starter homes is small fixer-uppers in the inner developed areas or small bungalows on the fringe of the developed areas. Council's blanket upzoning plan will reduce that stock of affordable housing in some neighborhoods like mine. Thirdly, blanket upzoning doesn't fit for some neighborhoods like mine due to long-standing infrastructure issues, small lot sizes in the inner city. Our sewer lines are bell and spigot clay pipes and are constantly failing. Some areas have to keep their water running in the winter to keep the mains from freezing. Lastly, our alleys are 12 feet wide, graveled and with power poles at the entrance. When my neighbor's garage burnt down, the fire trucks could not turn into the alley from the south side because the street was so narrow that it had cars parked on the other side. They had to back up, drive to the other end of the alley, and then to get out, they had to back down the alley because they could not make the turn into my alley. And that there's such a variety of housing in Ramsey. We have everything from the iconic Scotchman's Hill, full of multi-million-dollar large lot houses, to little 25 by 100 foot lots on the flats that have no alley access. And to blanket up zone these all, the RCG would be disingenuous to the entire neighborhood. It should be done more, as other people have said, on the local area planning. However, Ramsey Inglewood has had their LAP stalled for the last 2017, 6 years now. It's been in the making, and it still hasn't gone anywhere. And in the meantime, they keep upzoning pieces and say it's in the draft of the ARP. So anyways, councillors, if you vote for this blanket upzoning in order to address an affordable housing issue, you're betraying the trust of those of us who have worked hard to become homeowners in Calgary with a solution that will have little measurable benefit to the affordable housing issue. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Art, for coming today. Kristy.
Good afternoon. I have a PowerPoint presentation, if you wouldn't mind. I believe it was titled City of Calgary Deck.
I believe Clerks is just bringing it up. It says Seed Homes and About Us.
I believe so. If not, I can work with that.
Okay. So, Kristy, before you get going, I am going to remind you, we are here to talk about the housing strategy. We've had a couple presenters who've used this as an opportunity to talk about their business and the business opportunities. That presents some legal issues for us here. So if you could really focus your conversations around the housing strategy that's before us, it'd be greatly appreciated, so I don't have to cut you off. With that, go ahead.
Do you know what? I sincerely have to apologize. I misunderstood. I don't want to call it a shameless plan to promote our company, but I certainly don't want to waste your time then. So thank you, and I apologize for having wasted it.
No. If you have comments about the strategy, we would love to hear them. I just need to set those parameters. So if you have other comments, perhaps on slides, would happy to hear them.
Certainly, I think I will back away. I was really just looking to promote. We do have a modular home option that we would like to present, but I will use a different platform if that's all right with you, but thank you.
I appreciate your honesty in that. Thank you.
I am sorry. I am truly sorry. You guys enjoy your day. Thank you very much.
Grayson.
Yes. Good afternoon, Chair and members of Council. My name is Grayson Witcher. Calgary, like many cities in Canada, does need more housing. But we need to do what is right for Calgarians long term, not what is easiest. Blanket upzoning the entire city to RCG is easy. It hands the problem off to builders, developers, and speculators and asks them to decide what Calgary should look like 20 years from now. That's easy. But the outcome won't be as good as it could be. So let's put a bit more thought and work into the challenge and do what's best for Calgary's future. Here are the problems with blanket upzoning using RCG. 3, infrastructure, affordability, and quality of life. Infrastructure improvements are not commensurate with the increase in density, especially in the inner city. Schools are already overcrowded and implementing a lottery system. Imagine what the schools will look like when community density increases 2x or 4x. Social bonds will be destroyed as friends are split up and many are bussed out of the community. There's not sufficient unused land or money to build the amount of inner city schools that are necessary to accommodate the proposed spike in population density. Other infrastructure like libraries, sports and recreation facilities are also at or above capacity. Affordability. Housing affordability has not improved in areas where zoning was relaxed. Tearing down a nice $800,000 house in Altadore to build $1.5 million infills does not help affordability. And quality of life. The recommendations do not improve Calgarians' quality of life. Overcrowded schools and infrastructure will mean both children and adults will have to commute in vehicles. And studies have shown that long commutes are, quote, terrible for kids. The lack of inner city infrastructure relative to the elevated population will mean that Calgarians will be forced to own vehicles and reverse commute to study in libraries and participate in sports in new facilities built near the perimeter of the city. This could, in fact, increase urban sprawl by removing many of the attributes that attracted people to inner city communities and sending them to relocate to communities that can provide that lifestyle in the suburbs or other cities. RCG zoning attempts to solve one problem by creating many even bigger ones. It will increase population density by lowering our quality of life. Here are a few quick, simple suggestions. Many have been talked about. Increase housing density along some major roads and transit corridors. This could increase density without and could be matched by feasible upgrades to schools and infrastructure. Build new communities on the perimeter of Calgary with significantly higher population densities. This density can be effectively matched with higher school, library, sport and recreation, and commercial density at a far more reasonable price than rebuilding the inner city infrastructure. Again, we need to do what is right for Calgarians long term, not what is easiest. Let's have our communities and city planners decide what Calgary should look like 20 years from now, not developers and speculators. If we have a specific plan to increase density in a neighborhood, we can add classrooms onto those schools and keep friends together and schools walkable. We can build hockey arenas and libraries so our kids will have a place to be active and study. But if we double or quadruple density in neighborhoods and then start to think about improving infrastructure, it will be too late. We can make Calgary even better, but we need a plan. I urge city councillors to reject the recommendation 1D regarding blanket upzoning. Thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Grayson, for joining us today. Barbara.
Hello, Madam Chair, Mayor Gondek, councillors, and the audience listening to the presentations here. Thank you for this opportunity to voice my observations and potential solutions. My name is Barbara Streibl, and I have lived in Calgary for the last 25 years. There will always be the need for public and nonprofit cooperative housing, and kudos to the City of Calgary of taking initiatives for more public housing. I would like to address the option of secondary suites and my experience with trying to have a legal suite approved. It is not a neighbor's pushback that prevented our suite. It was the City of Calgary requirements, and every couple of years there would be new requirements or a change in the building code that would move our the approval of the basement suite. We finished the basement where we intended to have our suite, and we added insulation into the floor, the side, the gyprock, all of those things. And in 2008, we added a bathroom, and we thought we were pretty much finished once we put in stairs directly into the basement. Then there was a requirement for a separate heating system, which we installed in 2019-20. And then all we had to do was to install an air exchange system. We have a new raised, it's less than 25 years old. It's a raised bungalow, so we have 5 huge windows for cross ventilation. It was planned that way, but we are still required to have the air exchange, which cost $5,000, and my husband refused to go along with that. Then in 2020, a new building code came in asking for soundproofing. So we put in the soundproofing, but we still don't have the air exchange. So from 2008 to 2023, we still don't have approval. That's 15 years when we could have rented that basement suite. It's a loss to those who need it and still need a place to live. And for us, at $1,000 a month for 15 years, that's a loss of $180,000 that could be used to pay down our mortgage. So that's money that we can never recover. I do not have a company pension. The rental income was to be my pension income, and with the mortgage paid off, it would have been enough. The house is close to university, even closer to an LRT station and bus routes with easy access to downtown. If people cannot find housing, they start living in parks on the street under bridges. Without access to sanitation, they have to spoil by necessity the spaces that are usually reserved for daily commute and recreation. There goes sustainability, human dignity, and basic hygiene. We certainly do not want to be in a position where it leads to sickness and unhealthy environment and create sorts of epidemics of cholera, tuberculosis, typhus, etc., previously seen in the last century in overcrowded and sanitary cities. There is a solution to the current housing crisis. There are many houses already built where a part of their living space could be converted into healthy and safe spaces to live. Up-to-date electrical, fire, and egress standards, and no radon or mold. Leave out the fancy air exchange, soundproofing, and fire protection of windows when there are other points of safe egress available. Pre-approved secondary suites. There was a plan some years ago to pre-approve secondary suites that are close to LRT station on the premise that renters in those locations would be more likely to use public transit than a car, and therefore the parking issue would not be such a major thing. And their design should be approved before homeowners spend money and time going through the approval process. Encourage home building companies to consider potential secondary suites in their house designs so that no major changes are required should the homeowner decide later to rent the suite rather than use the space themselves. Encourage builders and potential homeowners to consider 1.5-story houses with attic trusses and pre-planned stair access rather than build bungalows with a gentle roof slope. Using the approach of more legal secondary suites, basement above garage, bachelor pads, and other options such as boarding houses for students. If houses lived in boarding houses close to schools rather than in apartments, there would be more apartments available for other renters.
Barbara, thank you. Your time is up. Thank you for joining us today. There may be questions of you, so you can just take a seat in one of the chairs behind you, and if there's questions, then you'll be close to the microphone. Councillor Wong, you have questions first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. This is for Art Matsui. Art, please. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your story. You spoke about Inglewood, Ramsay, and the ARP process, and the fact that it started and kind of stalled. My first question is, did you participate in the process back then?
Yes, right from the start.
Okay.
I was a member of the development committee in 2016.
Great, thank you. And what was your hope and expectation at that time as to what an outcome of an ARP would be?
Well, it's like any other ARP. They identify from the local area perspective, from the residents of the neighborhood, where they want to see density and, built forms and things like that. And, so we went through years of this exercise, and then the draft came out, and basically they totally ignored our recommendations and, put in what they wanted. Okay. Especially towards heights on the Inglewood side, and where I live is very close. I'm overlooking Inglewood. So.
Okay, fair enough. Today, fast forward to 8 years later, are you still part of the Inglewood Ramsay Community Association and the planning group?
Well, it's been hard times for community associations in Calgary, and we no longer have a development committee in Ramsay, and they still have one in Inglewood, but we don't have one in Ramsay.
Okay. Would you say that the expectations 8 years ago and today are similar, that you would like to see that orderly development of density through an ARP?
Well, they're similar. They never really changed, but I mean, right from the get-go, because the LRT is passing through our neighborhoods between Ramsay and Inglewood, it was council's desire to have even greater density than, we had advocated for to go to like, where they had like 12 meters, they said, no, it should be 30. And then where it was 30, they said, no, it should be 50. And things to that nature.
Okay. Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There are no other questions for this panel. Thank you all for coming and joining us today. All right, we're gonna try to make another panel and then we will break. So I am gonna go back here. So Kyle Parrott, Tony Morris. Tony, you're here? Okay, can you just take a seat in one of these chairs over here? Perfect. Scott Laird. Scott's there, perfect. Okay. Heather Heisman. Dan Evans. Dan, you're here? Okay, come on over. Mike Borkristl. Woohoo, it's your turn. Abina Boadi. Kent Manning. Byron Miller. Okay. Okay, we're gonna do.
Here.
Oh,
I'm here. Hello.
Hi, sorry, what was your name? Who do I have? I have someone unmuted on the phone line, which is just fine. I'm just wondering who it is. What your name is, please.
Kelly Morrison. Atkins.
Oh, I have two people. Okay. I heard Kelly.
Kelly Morrison.
Okay, Kelly, I haven't called you yet, so if you just want to mute yourself, and I'm just going to double check that you're on one of my lists. Kelly, I don't have you, so I'm going to add you onto my list. And then who was the other person that was online right now?
Kelly Morrison.
Atkins, panel 30. And I'm Eva, panel 31.
Eva. Okay, Eva Thorne Thomas. I have you.
Yeah.
Okay, and Kelly, I am not seeing your name. So, Kelly, what I'm going to do is I will put you on the next panel, and that panel will be when we come back from break about 3:45. So if you want to hang up and do a few things, you can call back in just before 3:45.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, this is Heather Heisman. I'm not sure if you heard me acknowledge that I'm here.
Oh, Heather? Okay, so Heather, I will also put you right after the break.
Thank you.
Okay, so that'll be about 3:45. So if you want to hang up and call back in, you totally can. Okay, so this panel then is going to be Tony, Scott, Dan, Mike, and Eva. Okay, so with that, if you
here. Hello, Abina Bodi is here.
Sorry, Abina?
Abina Bodi, sorry, I couldn't press the code. I apologize.
That's okay, Abina. I will also put you after the break, so that'll be about 3:45.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Council Connor.
Okay.
Kelly Morrison.
Yeah, Kelly, you'll be after the break.
Shelley Morrison.
Oh, Shelley.
Shelley Morrison.
Okay, Shelley, I haven't. All right, I haven't.
Morrison.
Yeah, I haven't called that yet. So just to keep everything together, the people that we're going to go to for this panel are Tony, Scott, Dan, Mike, and Eva. We were then going to take our afternoon break. When we come back from our afternoon break at 3:45, I will put together a new panel and we will go from there. So if you are presenting online, if you can just make sure you're muted and we will go ahead. So go ahead, Tony.
Thank you. I have a copy here for the clerk if you wish to distribute that at some point. Thank you. Good day, mayors, councillor, and members of city administration. My name is Tony Morrison. For the last 10 years, I've been the co-president of the Calgary River Communities Action Group, a not-for-profit volunteer society formed in the days after the 2013 floods. Our mandate includes addressing numerous policies proposed by all three levels of government, knowing that bad policy poorly made can do more damage than floodwaters. Thankfully, almost without fail, our elected representatives, including City Council, did not just hear, but listened, and the final outcomes were invariably better. Today, I'm speaking to you not as a representative of the Action Group, but on behalf of the Rideau Roxburgh Community Association, the neighborhood in which my wife and I have worked and lived for 20 years, and where we've raised our 3 sons. Late this summer, I was asked to participate with other neighbors in the West Elbow Local Area Plan process just getting underway this month, which will involve an extensive and well-planned discussion between the cities and numerous community representatives to formulate a comprehensive plan to evolve and refresh these communities over time. This process makes sense to us as it's to be a dialogue among key stakeholders to set a path for the growth of West Elbow within the context of the needs of Calgary as a whole. Given my work with the Flood Action Group, I believe in the power of citizen engagement. Given my work as a lawyer for 32 years, including with large public entities, I've been a part of important policy decision-making. What prompts us to speak to you today is the task force report's blanket rezoning recommendation. In our community's view, this is a potentially damaging policy. Before I elaborate, let me say that most of the recommendations in the report appear to us to be sensible, workable, and laudable. But the upzoning recommendation is fundamentally different. It is a profound and irreversible change to the base housing stock of this city built over decades, which we understand represent approximately 60% of Calgary's residential communities. It instantly changes the development expectations of the hundreds of thousands of families who've made investments in these neighborhoods based on the social contract with the city expected by residents through zoning. Most importantly, it excludes the citizens each councillor here represents from fundamentally important conversations. The myriad unintended consequences to blanket upzoning, spoken to so eloquently by Jessica in panel 19 last evening, cannot be ignored and must be rigorously considered. Blanket upzoning may well result in a land rush by speculative investors and developers that drive land prices up much higher throughout the city, as we also heard last night. Upzoning will increase density, but may simply not address affordability to those folks most in need. This one recommendation is the nuclear option. When I first heard that the task force recommended blanket upzoning, I went to the webpage in order to learn more. The first thing I did when I opened the report was to scroll to the bottom, expecting to see an extensive list of academic references. Nothing. No detailed discussions regarding the efficacy of upzoning, no data drawn from jurisdictions that have done this, no scholarly discourse. The upzoning recommendation is not justified by the report. But we're not here to debate the question of whether upzoning will actually achieve the stated ends. And I'm not about to tell you what my community has decided as we're just starting our LAP process. But what I can confidently say is that my community has no interest in being excluded from discussions regarding the housing forms built around it. The community does not wish to be involved, to evolve at the whim of the for-profit property developers and the speculative investors that ply their trade in neighborhoods under transition, looking for highest margins. And the upzoning recommendation is also unnecessary. The pathway to evolve communities now exists through the local area planning process. The city has already finalized 2 wide area LAPs and numerous others are underway. The LAP process is a type of inclusive community engagement that should be championed by all councillors on behalf of their constituents. With residents being disenfranchised in such a critical way, does council really have the mandate for blanket upzoning? As a lawyer, when I hear someone say they wish to be bold, I hear them saying that they're prepared to be careless. We suggest that council take this generational decision to the people that elected it. It is much more significant to this city's future than whether another Olympic Games is held here. So let the people decide through a clear plebiscite or at the next election. There is so much else that the report suggests could be done now to address these issues for the folks that really need immediate support, which do not silence the people who elected you.
For coming. Your time is up.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
your time.
Scott.
Madam Chair, Madam Mayor, Councillors, my name is Scott Laird. I live on Rideau Road, Southwest in Ward 8, and thank you for this opportunity to share my views on this important topic. And I realize that's kind of a throwaway courtesy line as I've listened to your proceedings for the last 2 days and the time and attention you've given. I want to make that a very authentic thank you for your service. We agree that Calgary, and it would appear that other major cities in Calgary, are facing a shortage of affordable housing, be that rental or for purchase. My comments today are to address some of the recommendations of the task force, both as to the impact on our property and community, but also whether it addresses the problem of capacity and affordability. And I would like to say, in getting a confirmation online from the city of my approval to speak today, I had the opportunity to review many submissions that were so thorough and well crafted. I would refer council particularly to letters submitted by Christopher Davis, who we've heard already today, so you're well familiar with him, and Mark Woitis, that impressed me and aligned well with my views, so I'll try to be brief here. Firstly, to state the obvious, I'm concerned about how the possible redesignation of the zoning of our family's property and the community of Rideau Park could impact its value. The current RC1 zoning is an attribute to our property that we value. If this proposal is approved in its current form, that attribute will be taken away from us without our consent. And that is perceived as self-serving, then so be it. We purchased our home in 1986 with the knowledge that the zoning was RC1. We made significant financial investments in expanding the dwelling and maintaining it to the standards appropriate, in our view, for an RC1 community. We feel that if council were to approve the blanket change to RCG, it could be viewed as an impairment to the value of our property without compensation. I would like to think that's an unintended consequence by members of council. I assume that the task force had members with relevant experience and acted in good faith in making its recommendations. I don't mean to discredit their work in any way, but their report is nothing more than a source of information and guidance to assist members of council in making a decision, along with what other relevant information each of you can assemble from your own experience and from input from your constituents. In fact, the task force said in its report, and I quote, "Most of our recommendations are the starting point, not the end. Many will need thoughtful consideration by administration and engagement with Calgarians to implement. All will have a significant impact for Calgary if they're implemented." So I would encourage members of council to view these recommendations through a critical lens. And I don't mean to suggest you have not done so already. I would ask you to question whether the recommendation for a blanket rezoning of RC1 across the city to RCG addresses the objectives of this housing policy. It certainly deals with the reduction of red tape by providing certainty about zoning and what types of housing will be permitted. But is that the only bottleneck in providing more affordable supply of housing? I think the problem is far more complex, and believe me, I'm not an expert in this field, just a homeowner with, I'd like to think, some financial acumen. I think there are a number of other issues affecting the ability to build new affordable housing, including a shortage of skilled construction labor, high cost of materials due to rising inflation, supply chain logistics problems, rising interest rates affecting both the cost for builders and demand from buyers, etc., and affordable land. A developer looking at previously designated RC1 lot, and to use our community of Rideau Park as an example, may see an opportunity if there's certainty in the higher density zoning. But they still face the economic realities of a profitable transaction, as they should. So they purchase a lot in a higher priced neighborhood, build something appropriate for that community with multiple units on a previously single unit lot, and try to make money. I strongly suspect that while this may provide more supply, that it will be among the highest priced, higher density housing in the city, and not at all addressing the affordability objective. I don't believe you can create affordable housing in higher valued inner city single family communities by unilaterally imposing a new zoning category. You can only build affordable housing on land that is priced accordingly. I don't envy your position in trying to find solutions to this problem, but I'm confident in suggesting that this blanket rezoning is not a solution. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Scott. Dan.
That's not moving. Hi, my name is Dan Evans. Thanks very much, Council, for taking the time to listen to citizens over the last couple of days. Democracy can be painful, so thanks for doing that. I'm a resident of Crescent Heights. I've been a developer in the community as well, and I'm on the Community Association's Heritage Planning Committee. I'm speaking today to encourage you to consider a small amendment to the housing strategy that I believe will actually have no effect on the potential of the strategy to actually address Calgary's housing crisis, but that it is equally as essential to Calgary's future, and that's preserving our heritage assets. So over the years, this council and others before you have taken several steps to conserve the heritage assets in our oldest inner city communities. It was just a few years ago that the first of the new local area plans, the North Hill Communities Plan, was passed to council, and less than a year ago that council adopted the North Hill Communities Heritage Guidelines as part of that plan. Now, these documents set out a clear vision for the conservation of the city's inner city heritage assets while still allowing for growth and intensification. This is but we're very concerned today that a single uniform RCG zoning across the city will threaten heritage assets, and as a result, result in development that will actually be counter to the principles that were set out in those documents. Now, it's not about Crescent Heights, by the way. It's about telling the story of our city and conserving our collective history in neighborhoods like Inglewood and Sonalta, Cliff Bungalow and Boness, Elbow Park and Mission. These heritage areas are currently being identified and mapped out as part of the ongoing local area planning process. That process allows for thoughtful planning of the heritage preservation within these communities, a process we worry will disappear or become irrelevant if the housing strategy passes without recognizing that heritage preservation is also a critical need. Now, just recognizing heritage guideline areas in local area plans has been a great initiative. But it's like drawing lines to denote heritage district. But drawing lines to denote these heritage districts does nothing to protect the assets within them. It's like building a game reserve to conserve an endangered species and then doing nothing to prevent hunters from coming on the reserve and shooting them. You need to have some additional policy in place. So, we support expanding RCG land use across the city. Every community should accommodate more density by adopting RCG zoning in neighborhood local areas. But I'd like to propose that there be some mechanism in place to identify and preserve districts within communities that are identified as heritage areas. There needs to be a district land use or policy for heritage areas that recognizes that these areas are meant to be preserved. So, by the way, we also agree that RCG development may be appropriate on some lots within heritage areas. But when you're removing century-old heritage homes that are in excellent condition and removing mature trees from heritage boulevards or private properties without any oversight, it's clearly not aligned with the intent of the city's approach to heritage preservation. Without that, the result will certainly be the gradual and irreversible removal of heritage assets to the point that there's not really any heritage left to protect. Now, you may believe that our current housing crisis overshadows the need to protect our heritage, but I ask you to think about whether the impact of this strategy would significantly change at all if we chose to protect our sensitive heritage assets at the same time. Our new LAPs were supposed to be the answer. We'd identify and preserve these areas in our communities that meet strict heritage criteria, but we seem to be abandoning that before we even get started. It's not difficult. Adding up all the protected heritage areas in the city would be less than 1% of city's existing land. Rezoning those areas to RCG is not going to make a significant dent in Calgary's density goals, but it will effectively erase Calgary's history. So we request the council consider an amendment to the housing strategy that allows for an additional zoning area to accommodate the preservation of the city's heritage assets. Whether that's creating a special policy area aligned with heritage guideline areas or some other policy tool or zoning level that accomplishes that goal. I don't know what the best approach is. But we need to address our housing deficit in Calgary, 100% agree, but we need to do it in a way that doesn't have the unintended consequence of having our heritage assets, these century-old homes and priceless mature trees, disappear as a result. So we want the legacy of today's decision to be that council took decisive action in addressing Calgary's critical housing shortage. Absolutely. But let's not add in that we had to erase Calgary's history to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Mike.
Madam Chair, Mayor Gondak, members of council, and city administration is very important in this process. I've sat here for 2 days. What I was originally going to say yesterday has changed quite a bit. It's quite amazing to me, being in the industry. I now serve as the vice chair of the Calgary Inter-City Builders Association, and in my private practice, our firm does between 100 to 150 rezoning and DP applications. So I'm fairly familiar with process and time delays, et cetera, et cetera. What is amazing to me is that the lack of knowledge of people owning R1 or understanding what RCG and what HGO can do. There's way more to it than I can do in 5 minutes, but RCG will help affordable housing, and I can explain that, but not within 5 minutes. I need someone to ask that question. Affordability is not necessarily low-cost housing or subsidized housing. It's what people can afford within their income level. And what the city is missing right now is the level of 300 to 600K. But what happens is that there's a large income base that can afford that, but it's not available. RCG and HGO will provide that. The reason, if they can't afford that, they go down. So they go down to the lower cost housing. They go down to subsidized housing. And that leaves a real deficit in our low cost housing. So bringing in RCG across the board is going to help alleviate some of that. I've heard that R1 lots in the affluent areas, well, won't do anything for low cost housing. You're right, it won't. But developers aren't going to go in there with the land costs the way they are and trying to develop something that they can get 2 subdivisions over for $300,000 less. It doesn't make sense. It was also said that, well, okay, let's just rezone R2. Well, now you're segregating the R2 lots to the R1 lots, so you have to do it as a blanket. You have to go across the city. But it's just a rezoning. At the end of the day, you still have to get a development permit. And the development permit has process. And it has process for public, for communities, and for industry. Part of this initiative is to get permitted use. Well, we can do permitted use. It is allowed in RCG right now, but only for certain things. So there's got to be a lot of work being done on the bylaws so that it involves public and the public can get involved with what's going next to them. And that can all be done through bylaws and through policy. So this is another tool to give industry to help catch up to the housing crisis that we have. Our challenges right now is we have some RCG stuff coming that will be in that 300 to 400K that Councillor Chabot was talking about. The reason why it's not on the market right now, we worked for 1.5 years to get things passed last November. It came into effect in January. We applied for a rezoning on that particular lot. Took 7.5 months to get through council. And of course, at council, you know how many meetings you have to go through. At one session, Councillor Putman said, wow, this is great. We did 15 rezones, so that's 60 units. That's only like 15,000 short of what we need. He asked he asked administration what the breakdown was between Greenfield and inner city housing, and he thought that might be 70-30. Administration came back and said 88-12. That's a far cry. This is going to help reduce that deficit. We'll get back to 70-30 with this kind of housing. There's also a reason why we don't do concurrent applications. But again, not in my 5 minutes. I'm running out of time here already. Let's see where else. RCG and HGO gives us the affordable housing we desperately need with an opportunity to have public, to have a say with any relaxation the way it's written now. The other thing is a lot of RCGs that were shown in the last 2 days, they all talked about corner lots. Well, corner lots are going. This is all about mid-block. I was part of the team that wrote RCG, and I've been part of the team that rewrote them 3 times. And what's coming for mid-block is affordable. But nobody talks about that. They talk about these $700,000 corner lot complexes where the units are large. Again, I'm running out of time. So the goal of the MDP is to get closer to that 50-50 established areas to Greenfield, which is currently at 88-12. Voting for the task force recommendations is a huge step in the right direction. With this current housing crisis, strong leadership is required to make some difficult decisions, and this is a difficult decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. We have one more panelist, Eva.
Hello,
Eva.
can you hear me?
Oh, we can. Go ahead. You've got 5 minutes.
Thank you. Hello, Chair, Mayor Gondek, and councillors. My name is Eva Torn-Thomas. I'm a resident of Whitehorn in Ward 10. My husband and I own a house and do not have major affordability problems. I always vote. How has the housing crisis affected my circle? I have a neighbor who's helping her vulnerable friend who was forced out of her home by her landlord. I have a friend on AISH who will be unable to afford to stay in her home when she turns 65 in a couple of years. And I have a friend who had to leave Calgary last year as she was unable to find an affordable rental. She now has to travel 3 hours for medical care in Calgary. While unhoused, she and her children were in some sketchy situations, couch surfing, and drugs were prevalent there. Her daughter is now an addict. So, also, there are many people picking up food distributed across the street from us. More and more people can't afford to buy food. It is distressing to learn of people unable to find a place to live. I urge you to focus on housing for the most vulnerable people who cannot pay market rent. Homeless people, people on social assistance, people with disabilities, veterans, low-wage earners, single parents, people with addiction, immigrants and refugees, people released from prison, students who eat only one meal a day or live in their cars, people living in garages intended only for cars. All deserve a dignified place to live. Costing hundreds, not thousands, of dollars per month. Calgary will need a lot of rental units. Many will need to be accessible, pet-friendly, and accommodate other needs. The city may have to build them. The poor are your trust, not developers. So I'm divesting from my REIT investments in housing, as I've learned that treating housing as a commodity is part of the problem. Affordable housing should be built with climate change in mind. The structure should be resistant to extreme weather such as hail and fire and flooding. It should protect its vulnerable residents from heat and cold. It should be very energy efficient. Who needs affordable energy more than people living in affordable housing? This is best done when the units are being built with good insulation and windows, heat pumps or geothermal for heat and cooling, and solar panels. The Rundle Manor mixed affordable housing is being built in our area. In my opinion, the design is a failure. The only nods to climate change mitigation and adaptation are hail-resistant siding and only potential for solar panels and EV charging. Why are these features not being built? Because they are not required now. Yet, the sun is shining now. Who is going to add solar panels on affordable housing with a weird-shaped roof? Also, there is only air conditioning in the common room, as it was deemed too expensive for all units. I doubt the residents will all have a sleepover there during the increasingly numerous sweltering nights. Did Calgary not learn anything from British Columbia's heat wave? My best friend's mother died in that heat wave, while my mother was hunkered down in her basement. I support in full Calgary's housing strategy, especially base RCG zoning which legalizes the construction of infill housing up to row house style and the removal of parking minimums. These are essential and necessary steps towards mitigating the housing and climate crises. They will support the use of low-carbon modes of transportation, like transit, walking, cycling, and multi-use structures share walls, which minimizes the energy use per unit. I want the Council to meaningfully address housing affordability and take the implementation of the climate strategy seriously. Build climate-friendly housing now to avoid retrofitting it all in a couple of years. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Eva, for being here with us today. We do have questions of this panel. Councillor Meehan, you are first.
Yeah, my first question is to Tony Morris, please. Hey, Tony, thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you.
I was listening to your comments, and one of the questions I had is, I think you said that you're concerned about base RCG driving land speculation. Can you explain how a blanket upzoning to RCG could make land speculation worse?
Well, from what I have read on the subject, any LAP process that is completed, and I draw this from Vancouver's experience, is that land speculators and developers will move into those areas that they know will be eventually rezoned, and that does tend to drive up pricing. We heard last night when I was watching one of the panels, I think the gentleman was on panel 19, and he represented infill developers. And in fact, he laid out the example of some of the costs that he faces as a frustration to him that he passes along to the ultimate buyer. And he talked about being a realtor as well as a developer, going after a piece of property that he liked at a $600,000 price point, and then finding in very short order, when the 20 other people were coming forward to bid on that property to try to get it, that spiking to $850,000 was the number he gave that stuck out for me. You have to imagine in those people that were going after that property, there would be some families who would be very happy to be in that house, who would want to raise their children in a single detached dwelling, but would be unable to get anywhere near that conversation because the price just escalates effectively. And the developers can manage that, of course, because they're going to put on multiple units, each of which will be significantly more expensive than just half of the price of the land, as we all know. So that kind of dynamic, I think, is in play. I'm not an urban economist. This is anecdotal. And one of the major concerns that I have about the report and anything that I've looked at around this issue since getting involved in it only just recently is that I'm not seeing the rigorous kind of thoughtful academic review to drive to real conclusions that the data suggests. Remember, an anecdote's just that, and two anecdotes is not data. And I haven't seen that. I've just seen recommendations in isolation. Certainly there should be much more work done before this nuclear option is actually exercised. You can't unring that bell.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that response. As a follow-up, like what we see is that when there's very few RCG parcels out there, that's exactly what happens, right? There's a run on the RCG, there's a ton of them.
Sure.
So I'm struggling to understand how if we were base RCG and every parcel in the city was already zoned that way, how that would make land speculation worse.
So the first question I have is, why do you believe that all land throughout Calgary should be available for RCG zoning? I'm not too sure what's driving that conclusion. The key point that I wanted to make was that the city council, the city has its own engagement with the community already in place, particularly through the LAP process. That's a sensible way to engage with residents in the community, key stakeholders who are involved in the evolution of the city, to determine through those discussions what would be appropriate evolution of these already existing neighborhoods, where to site certain types of zoning, certain types of building, in a way that brings people on board and has them support it, rather than that potentially haphazard development driven by developers and the investor community within neighborhoods that don't necessarily serve the needs of the people that are the key stakeholders to the entire conversation. So in my mind, having this blanket upzoning basically eviscerates and obviates the need for an LAP. Why would anybody take the time to be involved in that conversation if the zoning determinations have already happened? I would suggest that nobody really would. And it seems to me that the LAP process is the right and most effective way to engage in community. I mean, I think we look to council for two principal things: dealing with our taxes and keeping them sensible, and developing the system, the city. And having residents involved in that conversation is paramount, in my view.
Yeah, I appreciate that, your points about that would undermine the LAP work. And I will just give you a brief answer, is I think that we want to give you as much of a right to develop our CG as Mike over there. And so that's really the sort of answer. But I appreciate your response.
These are not mutually exclusive conversations. The important thing is a conversation should be had, and me and Mike should get together to determine throughout the neighborhood what are the best options to have that neighborhood evolve.
Received. Thank you.
Okay.
My next question is for Mike.
Thank you.
Mike, I want to ask you the same question about land speculation as someone who works in this industry. Would a blanket upzoning, in your opinion, lead to more land speculation?
Through the chair, Councillor Meehan, that's probably a 3-point question, actually. RCG allows for a minor uptake from RC2, for instance, in density from 2 to 4, and in RC1 it would go from 1 to 4. Right now, any corner lot that comes up, as was discussed by the chair of CICBA yesterday, Shamir, and others, like Aldavani from Round Square and stuff, there's a bidding war on those. The changes to the RCG rules and bringing in HGO has given us a whole new different form of building homes. They won't be as big, they won't be as large, the density will be there, but the price point will be way down. So therefore, when mid-blocks come up and these new housing forms take shape, they'll be affordable. There won't be as big a run on it. They won't be as competing because, first of all, the builders will have certainty that it's an RCG. Right now, I do a rezoning. By the time I go through the planning, I do the community outreach, I go through Calgary Planning Commission, and then it gets in front of you, it's 7 months. When we have a $500 a day carrying cost on a piece of property, waiting 7 months for a rezoning that we may or may not get, let's just round that to $10,000 a month. That's $70,000 that just got added to the cost of that development. Now it goes to the planning department through the DP process. They say right now 120 days. I believe that's probably business days, but they say 120 days. It's not been our experience of 120 days on RCG or HGO. On RC2, yes, it's actually sometimes below that. So that's another 6 months. So by the time we're actually ready to get going on this housing crisis, it's 1.5 years delayed at the City of Calgary at $10,000 a month. How do you keep it affordable? This blanket rezoning will give developers where they want to develop in a price point that makes sense to deliver affordable housing. This task force approves this, it's going to knock off a minimum of 8 months to that process. That's huge. That's $80,000 to the cost of that project. So
Okay.
I disagree with that. Those are my reasons that I hear from my members.
Right, okay. And it wouldn't just give you that right, it would give any citizen that right. As a follow-up, there's lots of compromises that are being suggested. And some people would say, well, let's not get rid of the subjective element of council weighing in or the public weighing in. Let's just try and, have a concurrent DP process or do something to shorten the existing process. And so, that wouldn't get rid of the cost entirely, but that might make it better and still, meet some of the concerns that Mr. Morris brought up. What do you say about that?
Well, we don't do concurrent applications on purpose. because there's no certainty on what the land zoning is going to be, and because there's no certainty right now on what can be built there, to spend another $30,000 on top of all these carrying costs for some design firm like myself to do it, to maybe get approved or maybe not, it's another risk that they're not willing to take. Concurrent applications make sense in some areas where there may be contentious or where they're heritage areas. I'm working on one with Dale right now, where we went RCG, and through the help of Councillor Wong, we came to a conclusion with the community on a way to make it work for both parties. The way the bylaws are written right now, under RCG, you do have a permitted use. It's a row house on a corner lot. But RCG was originally intended for mid-block, where we would put 3 townhomes together. That would be 14-foot units. It got morphed to the corner lots. Nothing else under RCG or HGO right now is permitted. If you vote yes and go to permitted use, there's still a lot of work that administration has to do to bring those bylaws up to where a permitted use on an RCG or HGO would make sense. It would be more contextual. It would shorten the timelines, and it would give certainty to not only the industry, but it would give certainty to the city and to the public. Because these bylaws, when we rewrite bylaws, most times we consult the public. We rewrite the bylaws, and it comes before you again anyway. So the public, if the bylaws are written properly, the public will have lots of opportunity to see whether or not they can put that project next to them. So there is that opportunity, and that's the next step of the process, in our opinion.
Okay, thanks for that answer. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Meehan. Councillor Pootmans.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Borkristl, thank you. Unfortunately, Councillor Meehan asked almost precisely the same questions I wanted to ask, but you held it out there to reciprocate. You wanted to talk a little bit about the laws of, the laws of supply and demand, and I'm wondering if you'd like to add anything further to your last answer.
Well, again, right now, because there's not much available in the city in that 300 to 600K range, and the new rules for HGO and RCG will provide that. I have 5 projects on the go right now. Unfortunately, by the time we went rezoning and it's still in building permit, and because it's so new, we got a development permit on 1. It won't hit the ground running and be sellable till next July, but it is coming. And that will help that middle, that what we call the missing middle. And so those people that can afford that missing middle are not taking the lower housing and the lower costs. That's going to open things up. And that should stabilize rents. That should stabilize some of the house prices coming across the board, because we're offering another product. We're not in that 600,000, 700,000 range on corner lots. We're not going into an affluent area and putting in a $1 million per side semi-detached. This is designed to help that missing middle and go after that market that we're truly missing. So I think the supply and demand is going to change quite a bit.
Thank you for that. And complete change of topic. I've been probing, you might have heard the interview with Round Square this morning, about the friction points on bringing through builders such as yourselves product to the market. Are there any frictions with CMHC, local banking support? The federal government, of course, has opened the floodgates for immigration, which I think is wonderful. It's an opportunity for us to get a lot of federal money support to continue to build a great city and refurbish infrastructure as needed. Is the banking industry supportive of your business, do you believe?
Well, I'm not at liberty to answer that, because I'm more of the design side. I'm not on the building side. So when I listened to what Al had to say today, there are a lot of opportunities for money, government money coming in, and my builders are taking advantage of that in some cases. CMHC money is really important, but there's stringent guidelines to how big they can be and certain rules that they have to follow, but I'm not up to speed on that part of it because I'm not the building end of it.
Maybe we can go offline and we can chat about this further.
For sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
My mic's not. Thanks, Councillor Pootmans. Councillor Wong.
Thank you. Mr. Borkristl, thank you for being here. Along the lines of Councillor Meehan's questions, when we talk about, you made reference to the Crescent Heights Heritage property, right? And in that situation, again, just to replay it, there's a contention between the RCG and how do you protect heritage. We went through the process, we put it on pause to allow you to work with the community to come to a compromise, to thereby bring back an approved DP and thereby approve the land use. If we go forward with the suggested collapsing of RC 1, 2, 3 into 1, thereby avoiding future land use hearings, how do we square those conflicts in the future?
I believe that because most of them are handled through the rezoning process now, and council has an over 95% approval rate of going to RCG anyway, if the bylaws are written properly, and if they're done properly with contextual type rules in place, then we build something on that particular lot that follows all those rules. Everybody knows what they're getting. As soon as you step outside that rule and the way the rules are written right now, it becomes a discretionary use. The second it becomes a discretionary use, it goes through advertising. As soon as it goes through advertising, every affected party in the community is given notice of it, and they can then weigh in with the planners. So there's a way with policy to be able to handle that. But we'll eliminate that 7 to 8 months upfront costs that we're having for waiting for rezones.
Okay, so just to replay what you just said, correcting the bylaw and making those considerations, those exceptions that we've been dealing with the last 2-3 years, this council has, having it corrected in the policy, in the bylaw, making sure everybody's aware of the rules will eliminate that. That's what you're saying.
Well, it'll eliminate it, but it'll also give the public the opportunity to know what's going beside them. And I think that's crucial in this. And that's why it has to be done through administration and policy.
Okay. Now, fast forward from that, assuming I hate to use the word blanket, but anyways, we'll use the word blanket. When a DP comes in, right now, DP, public has the right, particularly adjacent properties have the right to write a submission in. But that's it. There's no feedback.
Well, that's not entirely true, because the way the bylaws are written now, there's very, very, very few permitted uses. So the second that you have a relaxation, even a fourplex on a corner lot under RCG, it's almost impossible to design it with a permitted use. There's always something that comes up, and the biggest thing that comes up right now is landscaping and amenity spaces, so it makes it a relaxation. The second it's a relaxation, it kicks it out of permitted into discretionary, and yes, it's full advertising, full public, everything else.
Yes.
So we need a set of rules that if you build inside this box, everybody's happy with it, communities, everything else. You go outside the box, public has the right to have a decision on it.
No, I understand that, and then assuming what's being designed is within the box, right? The applicant applies for a development permit, right? And adjacent properties have the right to make comment to it. What I'm saying is the feedback from a development permit is not necessarily coming back to the applicant. And the question is that something that is crucial in your eyes to the public and to the building industry?
What's interesting about that comment, depending on the planner, and we deal with all of them, so we know them fairly well, they'll hint that there is things coming from the community, but they cannot divulge it because it's against the Privacy Act. So if I'm putting a project here and 6 neighbors send in letters, the only time we can ever know about that or hear about that would be at the SDAB process and the appeal process. So the planner would then send us a DTR, or they would send us an email saying, we've had a little bit of feedback from here, and you should look at this and should look at this, but they've never really told us what it is because they're not allowed to. Is that something we need to change? I think that's what we have to do with administration and figure out if there's a way that applicants can get that feedback so that we can avoid appeals. Anytime something goes to appeal, it costs the city at least $2,500 an appeal. It costs the public $200 to appeal it. That's a lot of money that the city of Calgary is spending because we haven't done something properly up front, perhaps.
Plus the carrying costs of that delay as well.
That's right.
Okay. Because a lot of the conversation has also been around how do we streamline the process, not only the land use side, but at the DP side of the equation. So that was where I was trying to get to in your comment there. Okay, one last thing, and I'm just going to quote only because I just got this now. In 2000, the city of Calgary had 4,400 building starts. In 2005, 7,100 building starts. 2010, 5,400 building starts. 2015, 4,700 building starts. In 2016, 3,500. So every 5 years prior to 2000, the number's been higher. We're now at 3,500. Do you know, can you tell me why it is that we have declines to that point?
Well, do those numbers give you a split between inner city, established areas, and greenfield?
Yeah.
In order to meet the goals of the MDP, as a council, you've had no choice but to open up more greenfield property, trying to meet the housing demand, while leaving the inner city far behind, which is what, as our group is trying to do, is we're trying to streamline that process. We're trying to make it affordable to build in the inner city. It's a completely different dynamic. Land developers in the greenfield, five big builders go into the land. They pick the land. They decide how they're going to pay for it. Most of them don't have to pay for the land until their first draw, second draw. Inner city, we're paying for it up front, borrowing money most of the time for that, carrying that cost for that first year until we get through the process. We need to figure out how to get that process down. RCG is a stepping stone. Like I said, we're not going to do RCG in an affluent R1 neighborhood. It doesn't make sense. But in areas where it does make sense, instead of taking that 7-8 months to bring it in front of council, it's already there. In places like Rutland Park that came up earlier today, they said that RCG won't do them any good. Well, it's an upscale in their density, but then that piece of property, somebody can look at it and say, oh, I can do RCG already. There's density. I might want to talk to Rutland and upscale it a little bit more to give them the density that they want. But they look at it and it's either special use or S1 or F1 or whatever it is, and they just shy away from it. They don't even look at it. So this is going to open up the marketplace to a lot. By reducing the time frames, you're going to bring a lot more builders into the picture too, because the dynamics of it and the business model, if it goes from a year down to 4 months, that's a business model that a lot more companies can deal with.
Right. Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. I just want to give everyone a bit of a time check. It's 3:44, which is when I said the next panel after break was going to be. We still have 3 councillors to ask questions, not a problem. We are going to respect the process, but we are definitely going to shorten our break so that those people who were waiting and who we asked to come back for 3:45, because I had, so yeah, it'll be a short break. So Councillor Chabot, Wyness, and Sharp, you're next in the queue though for this panel. So Councillor Chabot, go ahead first.
Before I ask questions, from a procedural perspective, should we not be taking a break and asking maybe some of the presenters whether they'd be willing to come back after our break to answer questions?
So I'm not sure. No, we're not going to. We're going to finish this panel like I said that we were going to do, rather than asking everyone to go away for another 30 minutes and then come back and ask questions for another 30 minutes. So no, we're going to finish this panel, then we will take a short break, and then we will get back to the rest of the panelists who are waiting as presenters. So go ahead, Councillor Chabot.
Do you think that RCG type development should be built anywhere in our city? Like, is there any lots in our city that you don't think would be appropriate for an RCG type development?
Councillor Chabot, that question's been asked and answered.
Mr.
Next
Borkristl?
question.
To Mr. Borkristl.
Yes, it has.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor
I didn't
Meehan
hear the
asked
answer.
Councillor Meehan essentially asked that exact question.
Really? I missed that answer. Mr. Borkristl, would you mind reiterating that for me? Because I missed it.
The short version is no, but if you cannot segregate that, oh, this is RCG and this is R1 and this is R2. You either got to blanket it or you don't do it.
Thanks. So you mentioned that you could potentially build some of this 300 to 400 type product. If you don't mind, if you're willing to answer, can you tell me if you have sold some in that range, and where would that have been?
Like I explained earlier, it's coming. When the rules got changed last November and came into effect in January, we did a rezone on 3 lots. It was past RCG, and they were mid-block. Now, mid-block, when RCG first came into being, it was designed for mid-block, where an RC2 would go to RCG and you put 3 townhouses. So it increased the density from 3 to 2. Builders found that the model didn't quite work, even though we had contextual applications, even though we had rules all the way around it. And people like Round Square morphed it into the corner lots, and that's where it became. Going back to the mid-block lots with HGO and RCG, we can now do a semi-detached in the front, a semi-detached in the back, and then 4 garages. Because you can only be 3 meters from the front and you had to have 23 feet between the units plus all the garages and everything else, the front units are now going to be in that 1,100 square foot range with a basement suite, because there's no restrictions on the basement suite, coming in at about 900. The rear units are going to be 800 square foot units with studio suites. So on that lot, you now have 4 price points on that particular lot. Now, the difference between RCG doing that on RCG and HGO is HGO has what they call an FAR, which is you take the square footage of the lot and you can go up to that density. So it'll allow for bigger units on bigger lots, where if you have say a 50-foot lot, RCG, the density is 4. But if you had a 55-foot lot and you go to HGO, we might be able to get 5, maybe 6. Coming in at an 800 square foot unit in the backyard as opposed to a 1,700 square foot on a corner lot, that price goes from $700,000 to $350,000.
For the rear ones, not necessarily all the parcels.
Not necessarily. Again, we're still doing the model. We're still waiting for administration to approve the first one. And the numbers that my builder has told me is that they're going to be in that 325 to 365 range, but they haven't quite got there yet, because again, their carrying costs and everything else. For 1 year at $10,000 a month, it's added $100,000 to that project. That's $25,000 a unit. That's big.
Mm-hmm. So in short, you're saying that some of these units that you're building are intended to be built for sale and not just for rent?
The intent is for sale. That doesn't stop somebody from buying it and renting it. We have no control over that, but they are intended for sale, yes.
Thank you. The question around LAPs and areas that are designated as being the preferred locations for RCG and or HGO, if council were to move forward with looking at initiating redesignation on those lots, would that assist you specifically as far as moving forward more rapidly in the process?
It would, to a certain extent, but I think there's only 1 LAP that's been approved right now, maybe 2. The North Hill Local Area Plan has been done, and they've got lots of lots designated for that already. I'm working on one other one. I think it's Mission or Westbrook. Yeah. So the LRPs are definitely helpful, but they're taking 1 year to 2 years. We've got a little bit of a crisis right now, and by voting yes to this will help us get moving faster.
Yeah,
and we'll get this housing crisis nipped in the butt.
But even those LAPs is just policy. It's not redesignation. So redesignation obviously would eliminate a certain amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely it would.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Councillor Winus.
Thanks. Can you just clarify, you made a comment earlier about pricing and everyone overbidding, and if it's over 300K, you guys go elsewhere. Can you kind of pick up that thread when there's that competition to buy and what the market's doing with builders?
Because we really didn't have a model, or most builders that I deal with didn't have a model that worked for mid-block, but it worked for corner lots in terms of what they could do, making their margins, making it all work financially, not getting huge profits like you see in Greenfield, because we work on very tight margins. When a lot becomes available, I mean, Shamir touched on this, Aldavani touched on this, several touched on that. The second a lot comes up available, you've got 32 inner-city builder lots. They're all bidding on it. Price goes up. Getting these mid-blocks and being them where we don't have to do the rezoning, we don't have the carrying costs, and we can build this smaller product for more affordable, that's going to make those a lot more attractive, and there won't be the same type of bidding war on them. And that's where I think the supply is going to come over the next 5 years. That's why we work so hard to do HGO and to do RCG, was for mid-block development, and not just on corner lots like we saw in Windsor Park, all the way down on the corner lots.
Now you talk about carrying costs, but what about the land lift that is a result of the rezoning that happens in the industry, and the ability the piece that plays into financing?
Again, I'd have to talk to some of my builders on that, but just because you rezone something RCG, it still has to go up for sale. It's still owned by somebody, right?
Finance industry still looks at it as a land lift. So when we're going to rezone, we're going to remove that land lift because now everyone can build that same capacity. Has that been a part of the conversation, and will that remove access to capital for individuals based on how the finance industry has been working in housing development?
I'm not privy to a lot of those conversations because, you know, again, the builders go out, they find these lots, and then they come to me to get the rezoning and do the application process and doing all that part of it. So I'm going to defer to a builder to give you those proper answers.
Okay, and then when we're looking at the number of builders bidding on a property, it's sort of talking about scarcity of supply. And I think we're seeing that where we have an influx of multiple buyers, not just Calgary-based individuals purchasing the properties here now. We have Vancouver, Toronto, we have the entire world bidding on properties now and speculating on the Calgary market. And we've seen that evolving before Calgary advertised this big crisis. And so now we're looking at changing zoning to provide builders more access to development and access to land and quicker turnarounds. My question is, are developers going to sell properties for less because we are looking at essentially passing a savings on to the industry?
That's the intent. That's what most of us are talking about. We'd love to be able to get into that $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 market without doing everything on a corner lot. That's the whole point of this, is that if you blanket all the corner lots, you're still going to have the competing market for that. But now the mid-block, where the affordable housing is going to come, where the more reasonable priced housing is going to come, that's where you're going to see the biggest influence. That's where you're going to see the biggest change.
But how does council get that guarantee when, as soon as a builder has built the property, lists it on the market, and people start bidding on properties?
We can't control that. You can't, we can't. That's just open market. In Greenfield, they control the market. In the inner city, we're open market. We're open market buying land. We're open market selling land. We're open market selling our product. We can only market what the product will bear, right? It's not a monopoly.
So then how can those two things be true at the same time? Is it open market, or is it you guys will guarantee to sell it at the $300 price regardless of what the bid on that property will be?
We believe that the mid blocks, there won't be as many competing offers, and there won't be because not all builders are going to look at those mid blocks and take them. There's going to be a certain percentage of people that will keep looking for the corner lots because that's their business motto. I have several builders that are looking mid-block. I've got, like I said, I've got 4 on the go right now. So I think you're going to see a shift to seeing not just corner lots being developed, but entire blocks being built with this new format. How they price it and how they sell it, I don't control that.
But if we're rezoning everything RCG and you're looking to purchase land to develop, wouldn't they just develop the opportunity and sell it for what the market is? And like, I can't put, like, you're talking end lots, but we're gonna, if this goes through, it's all zoned. It's the current homeowner has to sell it, so then someone will buy it because now it has the RCG potential to develop. They're not just gonna look for end lots. We're already seeing mid-block developments play out, and they're not selling for 300. So I'm just kind of curious as how you're coming to the conclusion that these will sell for 300 when I can look throughout the city where we are seeing mid-blocks and they're not selling for 300.
Well, all I can go is with the projects that I'm working on right now and how we're designing them and what the square footages of them are. The mid-block that was happening previous was not under these bylaws. The new bylaws have changed quite a bit. So the ones that are being developed mid-block now, I'd like to know whether they were under the bylaws previous to November or after November, because there was quite a difference in the bylaws.
I just don't see how someone buying a house online from Vancouver or Toronto is really factoring that in. They're used to trying to bid on properties and are coming in and outbidding even developers here and people looking for homes here. Like, we're having a housing crisis. And so if you're saying mid-blocks are not desirable, the conversations I've heard from Calgarians today is a house is desirable whether it's an end unit or a mid-block.
The mid-blocks are desirable because you can increase the density and at the end of the day, selling 4 units will always be slightly more profitable than selling 1. That's what I get from my builders. But because there's not going to be as much competition for mid-block, I don't think there'll be as high a price, and I don't think there'll be as big a bidding war.
Where do you get the conclusion that there's no bidding war when even for a single family home, people line up around the block to buy these houses?
Because we have a housing crisis right now, and for every house that goes up for sale, you've got 50 people that want it, because we have, what was the number the other day? We have 8,000 people that can't afford the house right now, or they've sold their house and can't find any place to live.
Yeah, that's why I can't understand that you're saying
That's
mid-blocks aren't
economics.
desirable.
That's not bylaw. That's not rezoning. That's economics of we're trying to solve that. We're trying to find a way to get more builders building more products so that goes away. And that's what this task force has recommended, and I believe that the task force has done a tremendous job, and I believe we need to vote yes for it.
Okay, so so in your opinion, it's a great recommendation that will result in lower priced housing, but we will let the market determine the price of the house at the end of the day.
At the end of the day, it would always be that way.
Thank you.
But we're trying.
Councillor Sharp, you are next.
Thank you. Mike, don't go away. I have some questions for you. Okay, first question. I might have missed it, so I'm sorry that I'm asking again. Do you know how many of the land uses you've applied for with this council have failed?
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing. Sorry.
Councillor Sharp asked how many of the land uses that you've applied for have failed at council.
Thanks.
To my knowledge, in the last 3 years,
The
2.
The last 2 years.
I've had 2 that have failed. Well, one that failed outright, and one we worked with the community with Councillor Wong, and it's gone to first reading, and we still have to do second and third reading once the builder decides what he wants to do.
Okay, but majority of them have passed.
Councillor Sharp, we're having a little bit of trouble hearing you. Can you maybe move closer to your microphone?
Yeah, I'm really close to my computer. But most of them have passed, correct?
Most of them passed?
Okay.
All of them have passed but one.
All but one.
Okay, cool. Question about permitted versus discretionary. So if this gets passed and it goes and has a permitted use, let's say a townhouse, and you work within the box of whatever is designed, there was a comment you had made that, we can still engage the community, but there would be no notice posting for the community to know these developments are happening on a permitted use, like no relaxation whatsoever. So would the expectation from the industry be that we use our engaged team to still do these engagements with the community, or is that something the developer builder are going to take on themselves?
I'm actually going to ask administration that, if I'm not mistaken, the second we apply for a development permit on land, do you not post a sign on that?
No, so sorry, I'm going to interject. I can't ask them questions. If it only gets posted if it's discretionary. Notice posting signs do not go up with any permitted use, and that's under the bylaw now. So I was just wondering, you had mentioned in your statement, if it's permitted, we would still be able to engage with the public. I just want to know if you think that's something that administration would have to do on top of now a permitted use, or is that something the industry is going to take on?
I think if we rewrote the bylaws properly, that is something that administration could indeed put in, that every DP, permitted or not, gets posted so that the public knows what's going on.
But then that's
not unreasonable.
But it still eliminates them speaking in front of their elected official. So it would be a process change, which would probably not really shorten time. So it's just something to think about. The other thing I wanted to ask you, there are 2 more questions and I'll try to be quick. You mentioned 4 months. Are you talking just the development permit?
Yeah,
about 4 months?
4 months would be a dream.
Oh yeah, so it's just the DP. You're not talking about like from a building permit, development permit and building permit?
No, right now, currently, it's roughly 7 months for rezone. It's about 5 to 7 months for a development permit. And then it's probably another month and a half for a building permit after that.
Okay. Okay, I think the 7 months can definitely be shortened. I think we have one of the fastest development permit times in the country, and actually I think the building permit times, we lead by example. So that's some information there. And then my last question is, and I just need clarification, you mentioned that you have a design that you're waiting for administration to give approval on. Now, is this a design that came through a development permit, or is this a
Councillor
model
Sharp,
that they're looking at?
I'm gonna rule that question is out of line. That's not what's before us today. What's before us today is that the housing strategy, not Mr. Borkristl's development application.
No, Chair, I'm going to challenge you on that actually, because I asked administration and they would like me to clarify. So I just need to understand, is it like you mentioned design, you're waiting for them to approve it. These were out of his mouth, and I'm asking administration, they asked me to clarify this question. Is this something that you mean that a design you will reuse, or just a design you have in the docket right now waiting for a development permit to be used?
It's in for development permit right now, and because it's so new, we're experiencing conversation with the Development Authority on exactly how the rules are being interpreted. So it is in for development permit, ready to be built. We just have some things to iron out for it to finally be approved.
Thank you. I just need clarification on that, and so did administration. Thanks for being here. That's it with my questions.
Okay. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Mike, for answering that.
Okay.
Wow. Okay, so here is where we are at. I had asked a bunch of people to come back about 3:45, so I'm just going to say this. Shelley, Joanne, Heather, and Abina, we have not taken, and I think they're all online, we have not taken our break yet. We need to take a break. We have some other people we need to take care of. So, Council, it is 4:03. We are going to come back in 15 minutes, so that is 4:18. And then we are going to move on to that panel. And just so you know, we still have over 30 speakers left that have signed up. So that's where we're at today, and we'll see you in 15 minutes.